This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion.
What a crazy damn year, right? 2020. What will we all remember about this year? Some of us will only think of COVID, lockdowns, airplanes canceled, life interrupted. But you know what? If you're listening, you're alive. And if you're alive, that's all that matters. Because if you're alive, you got a chance to make something happen. So forget all the crying and the spilled milk and all that stuff. It doesn't make one bit of fucking difference. Not at all. The only thing that matters, if you're here, if you're ready to roll, you got a chance. Now, before I give you a little Christmas trend following best of, I want to be Santa for a moment. I've got this great flagship product for people that do not know about trend following, or if you know about trend following. I have this over-the-top product, which includes training, which includes systems. This is what markets do you trade? When do you buy? When do you sell with a loss? When do you sell with a gain? And how much do you bet each time? Examples upon examples, videos to back it all up. It's overwhelming. I've been helping thousands of people for a very long time. So Santa is in the spirit today. Me, Mike Santa. If you want to know about my Santa special, which is going to happen right now around Christmas, before the new year, drop me an email. I'm real easy to reach. Michael@covel.com. That is my first name, Michael@Covel, Covel.com. Because look, if you've been on the fence or you don't want to take action, what did I just say? If you're alive, you got a chance. I mean, there's absolutely no better way that one could have made a bloody fortune on the likes of a Tesla or an Apple or a Bitcoin except by using trend following. Now, there might be some people that got lucky, but that's not a system. Trend following gives you the way to trade these uncontrollable, unpredictable trends that come out of nowhere. A way to think, a philosophy, and exact rules. Exact rules so you know, again, what to trade, when to enter, when to exit with a loss, when to exit with a gain, and how much of your limited capital, because we all got limited capital, how much of your limited capital do you bet? That's the deal. I'll tell you how to do it. I'll show you how to do it. My flagship training, heavily discounted for Santa time. Again, drop me an email, Michael@Covel.com. I will let you know how to proceed. Now, without any further delay, let's jump right into a little bit of my best of trend following. 3 guys, 3 legends. Ed Seykota, Larry Hite, Jerry Parker. Ed Seykota, one of the originals. Larry Hite, another original. Jerry Parker, another original. These are 3 guys that are just imbued with wisdom. To listen to them and understand their words is to be wiser, to be smarter, to get it. That's the only reason to listen, to get an edge. These 3 guys, they see clearly, very clearly, and they have an edge. Without any further delay, let me give you about 3 hours of absolute money-making genius. Now, some of you are going to immediately say, well, that's not money-making genius. They didn't tell me what to buy. I'm going to say, listen, you're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot. If you listen to these 3 episodes that come up next, Ed Seykota, Larry Hite, and Jerry Parker, and you don't get it, and you don't understand how to make money, and they did not help you, you're done. You're over. You're not going to make it. I mean, I don't want to tell you to go jump off a bridge, but you really can't understand anything. And I don't even know where to tell you to start. Because if these three guys can't break through your thick skull, now everybody doesn't have a thick skull. Some people have a very open mind. I like to think of myself as having an open mind. And I know many of you listening right now have a very open mind. My little warning was just for those that want to complain. I know. I shouldn't even address the complainers. But it's okay. I like to dig at them a little and remind them. So just think about it. If you listen now to Ed Seykota, Larry Hyde, and Jerry Parker, and you don't get it, do something else with your life. Go shovel shit or something. You know what I mean? Without any further delay, let's jump right into 3 great conversations. My guest today is Ed Seykota. Ed is affectionately titled by me a living legend. And even if no one else knew who Ed was, I would call him that. Not from any kind of a hero worship standpoint or anything like that. But early on in my career, Ed influenced me. He got me thinking clearly. If you ever see me picking apart arguments, starting debates, and perhaps you fixate on the emotional component of the debate, and you don't look at the facts and you don't look at the logic, that's what I learned from Ed. Put aside the emotion. Let people get all hot and bothered. Let them get all worked up. And then calmly, coolly break everything into its component parts and try and move things along a process that gets to a good answer. Maybe there's not a perfect answer, but let's move things along to a good answer. Let's think clearly about our words and our actions. I'm forever grateful that Ed Seykota influenced me in that fashion. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I was trying to think of an example just as we were getting on the call here, and I was thinking, and I'm not trying to pick on a particular bank or anything necessarily, but a few years ago, I read something that JP Morgan had made money every day in the first quarter of the year. And I was thinking, wow, is that a great example of the Gavopoly system in action? Would be one question to you. The second part of that question, though, would be, is that if there doesn't seem to be much outrage right now, and I'm wondering if the outrage, the lack of outrage, is reflected in the fact that so many average, everyday people via mutual funds and perhaps pensions actually have investments in these many Gavopoly-type companies. It just seems like it's a precarious situation.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on any particular banks, and I'm not sure exactly in what section you're talking about. But it's everywhere you look, everywhere there's a regulation, and there's a Gavopoly system at work, and the outrage, as you say, the outrage doesn't really occur because as the system grows, more and more people have an investment in it, and as you stop competition within a economy, the whole economy itself becomes less competitive. And we're certainly seeing that show up in our relationships with other countries, where particularly China and other countries, India and so forth, we're not competitive. The whole economy, our economy is not competitive because we don't allow ourselves to compete with one another anymore. And so we're not competitive with other countries.
I think to add to that point on the other countries, I see it being in Asia right now. It seems like that in Asia, you can build an 80-story office tower faster than sometimes perhaps you can install a fence in America.
Yeah, that's right. Trying to do anything in the United States requires enormous amount of regulatory effort, and the companies have to maintain whole staffs just to comply with regulations, and all of that has got to get paid for somewhere. So they've got to eventually get to raise prices, and we're not competitive. So it's and I'm not saying any of this is bad or wrong or should be changed. In my book, I don't say that that's anything wrong. I'm just looking at how does the engine work? How does this work, and how do we explain what we've got? And I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just saying, well, this is how it works, and I need to know how it works because, as your audience does, and so do I, we try to trade, and we want to understand as best we can what's going on. So my point is not to change anything. I'm not a politician, and I'm not running for office or anything. I'm not promising any changes, or I don't have any formula for change. I'm saying this is what's happening, and you might as well take this into your personal calculus when you're playing the markets.
Well, you make a great point, because you're talking to a guy that unfortunately grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. So I had to listen to too much politics. And I think there's a great video on the internet with Ray Dalio talking about the economic machine. And I think you're doing something similar, but it's your take, your research, and you're saying, hey, look, this is the machine that I see. This is the economy as I see it. And I'm not trying to give you a value judgment on it, but by all known facts and my research, the evidence lays out, this is what's happening.
Yeah, and Dalio has a wonderful video out there, and he's talking about how the economy works. Basically, his analysis, the supposition he has, we have a free economy, and those kinds of things work in a free economy. But since 1913, when we had the Fed, you'll see the free economy isn't really free to function anymore. And if you look at long-term charts up till 1913, before 1913, when we had the Fed, we had a fairly stable economy. We had blips, ups and downs, and so forth. But since the Fed's come along, it's enabled the Gavopoly system to put an effective tax rate on citizens and spend money in excess of what they can tax. There used to be a limit to government growth in the Gavopoly system. That limit was that they would have to tax people in order to fund the government. But they don't have to do that anymore. They can go to the Fed, and they can get however the mechanism works, however you want to explain the mechanism. You can say they can print up money or get a line of credit or whatever. Basically, they can spend money before they tax. I've shown in my model, if you keep government spending to under about 1.5% effective asset tax, so under 1.5%, government never can grow big enough to stop the growth of the free competition sector. But once you get an effective tax rate above that, then the government will grow, and it's a parasite. It's the same mathematics of a parasite, where the parasite will grow, and then finally it will take over the host, or like a cancer or a parasite. The mathematics and the dynamics are the same. It stays in balance if you keep the asset tax rate under about 1.5%, but we're way over that now. And we are seeing a decline in manufacturing and in tool making, and we're consuming, or the Gavopoly system is now consuming the free competition sector. And when we run out of a free competition sector, which is imminent in my opinion, then we have a whole different economy, where you have the Gavopoly system trying to manage the free competition sector, and it can't do that. It doesn't know how to do that. It's not set up to do that. It's set up to take and exploit. It's not set up to create and innovate. And so we're headed towards an economy in which we have basically a controlled economy, less freedom. I'm not suggesting this is going to change. I'm suggesting you've got to start admitting that's what's happening, and you got to cope with it. You have to cope with it in your decision making, and there are ways to cope with it. Wishing it'll come back and thinking you can vote for somebody that's going to turn it around, I think, is wishful thinking.
Let me take a step back, Ed. I want to kind of take a step back for a second, let you talk a little bit about some historical perspectives, your own in particular. And one of the things that I've always loved about you, and we're going to get back on the Gavopoli conversation and kind of take it to its natural ending and some of the solutions that you see, since if we're being faced with this Gavopoli situation, you do see some clear solutions, or at least some directions that people can go. There's no perfection for sure, but I think one of the things
I don't think there's a solution for the economy. I don't think there's a problem. It's just, this is just what it does. I think there are some things that people can do as individuals to cope with it as it evolves and changes, but I'm certainly not suggesting a change in the economy. I think this is just what it does. There's nothing to fix. This is what it does. Just like people, they get born, they grow, they mature, and then they die. That's the way it happens. And so you just have to learn to cope with things.
Well, you just made my point for where I wanted to go, which is, and correcting me on language. One of the things that I've always learned from you and admired from you is the clear thinking. And I always, when I try to respond to people, if I'm doing an interview or something in an online forum, I try to stay clear. I try to be as objective as I can. You are exceptionally good at this, and especially when people look at your writings, they can see it's very, very clear. How did you start to have this type of clear thinking as an individual, or was this something that you felt always as a young man and it's been with you your whole life? How did you develop this way to look at the world clearly?
Well, thank you. It's a struggle for me. I'm thinking about it a lot, and I always think, wow, I could have said that. I could have said that better. I'll probably hear this interview and I'll say, oh man, that's pretty lame. I do a lot of writing and rewriting, and I've always done that. And I try to think about something until it gets simple. And if it's complicated, I figure, well, I don't understand it yet. So one of the things I do is I just think about things till they get simple. And then they're easy to explain, and then they're pretty clear. And I've had some mentors in my life that have been sticklers. Jay Forrester, for one, absolutely unforgiving about any misuse of English or anything, any equations. They ought to be annotated, and the units of measure had to match, and you just couldn't get away with anything. And so I developed that. I just developed that habit. I've developed this to such an extent that I have a language that goes with it, SVOP, which subject, verb, object, keep it in the present tense. That's a way that helps sort it out. If I find myself straying from that grammatical convention, I figure I don't understand something. Anything that's clear fits into that linguistic format. So I'm on this, and I enjoy it. It's just I probably take it to extreme. It's not. It's not a good strategy socially. Socially, people are very metaphoric, and they're very inaccurate, and they just say what they feel, and you've got to decipher their feelings and so forth. So I don't recommend this as a social method, but as far as thinking and trying to get logical answers, it's pretty good.
I was wondering maybe if you would go a little bit further on Jay Forrester. And for those that don't know, very well-known MIT professor, systems dynamics. And I think Jay is still with us. He's like 96, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
And prior to publishing my book, I went and visited with him, and I included him, some things on him in the book. Amazing person. He, at one point, held a patent on the core memory for computers, enabling some of the first of the world with a computer. He was behind that. He was inventor of the radar positioning system, which was a servo control mechanism. And then he went on and applied servo control thinking to business situations and developed a modeling language, invented the whole field of system dynamics. To really understand how systems work, I think requires a lot of training. I think it's imperative to have some kind of an engineering background, preferably electrical engineering, preferably servo dynamics, to understand how systems work. So there's a whole field, and he pioneered it, and this is an amazing guy.
I was actually, I'm working on a project right now, and I was reading a couple of his white papers recently, and it's I can see how he influenced you on the clear thinking, because his white papers are just crystal clear. It's fun to read them because it's just there's no beating around the bush. It's all just direct. And it's understandable too. It's not an academic treatise. It's something that you can sit down and start to digest.
He would go to conferences on economics, and there would be a panel, and then they would have comments, and he would point out that a certain speaker in his speech had contradicted himself several times. And he would listen. He would really listen to what people say, and he would think about it. And then if it wasn't accurate, he wasn't shy about saying so.
No, like I said, I think for the audience out there not familiar, checking out your Trading Tribe website at edsakota.com, they could definitely get an understanding of, if they're not familiar with what you and I are talking about right now, they will definitely start to understand how you handle your FAQs, your frequently asked questions. But that's a completely different subject. Let me go ahead.
On the topic of getting things exactly right, I want to point out that's Seykota.com, not edsakota.com, SEYKOTA.com. Ed Seykota goes somewhere else. Yeah, and so do I, but the website is Seykota.com.
Ed, let me get back into the notion of Gavopoly for a second. So we've got this system that's operating, and as you kind of say, it's doing as it should. You are observing and you're describing it, but it's not a pretty conclusion to when the 39th day and the duckweed races across the pond. It's not a pretty conclusion, but I think what's tough when you look at the media and the political systems, everybody has a fix. If you vote for me, I can fix it. I've got this platform. The media says if we do this, we can fix it. If we watch this TV show, if we get upset about this issue, and I'm just as guilty as some people to get upset about things, but it's all seems to be one big dog and pony show. But if we get back to your modeling of the Gavopoly system, the dog and pony show just distracts us, but the system marches on.
Well, the dog and pony show is part of the system. The dog and pony show is purposefully orchestrated to distract people from the real issues. Nobody talks about the real engine behind this is the growth of the Gavopoly system and the fact that it has unlimited access to money. In my model, I've even tried to, even if you eliminate borrowing for the government and you reduce regulations, at this point it would take 20 or 30 years of austerity to get any meaningful change, to get us back to a free competition society. You're not going to get anybody elected on a 30-year austerity program in which the government decides that they're not going to borrow money anymore. And that's just not going to happen. So nobody's even talking about this, or nobody's even interested in it. The real issue about how the economy works and how debt works and how deficit spending works and bailouts and all the rest of that, those are just kind of accepted, and no one is concerned about it. What they're concerned about is there's a race riot, or there's police, or someone thinks the police are being too brutal, or one race group is beating up on another race group, or there's people coming across the border or not coming across the border. So we're talking about fixing things that are all symptoms, but nobody. There's a couple politicians. I don't care to name any of them, but there's a couple of them that try to talk about the real issues. They always get marginalized, and they don't even make the final cut in the political race. And what you have is the distinction between political parties is fairly obscure at this point. They're all voting for expansion of the Gavopoly system. They want to make this. The system is now in its final phases where it's taking over. There's no way to resist it. There's no way to stop it. I don't recommend spending a lot of time worrying about it. It's like a patient, or if you had a friend that was dying of terminal cancer, well, what do? You try to make the best of the time you have, but you don't spend a lot of time trying to trying to fix it. There's nothing to fix. Or someone is just dying. There's nothing to fix. We're making a transition, or a caterpillar turns into a butterfly and is a change in form. There's nothing to fix. It's how it works. You don't have to use death metaphors. It's a transformation metaphor. The economy is transforming from what used to be a free competition, innovative society. It's now transforming into a very controlled society. This is a transition. It's natural. It happens time and time again to all societies. There's a cycle. It goes back and forth, and there's the Gavopoly system grows until it finally renders the host society inoperable, and then it collapses, and then it starts over again. This is a long-term cycle. You don't find any currencies around that are more than a couple hundred years old. And if you had invested one penny at the birth of Christ at year zero, or whatever year you want to make the difference between BC and AD back then, that one penny growing at nominal interest rates of a couple percent would be more than all the money in the world. So you say, well, how can that be? Because there certainly was a penny, and there certainly was ways to invest, and how come nobody has done that? Well, because you earn a lot of money, and then you get these periodic resets in the money. So nobody's able to accumulate money for very long, because the money eventually goes worthless. And that's also part of the design. And you have hard money for a while. You have gold or sticks or some other tokens of exchange, cattle or whatever you have. And then you go off into currency, and then you get bankers decide they can loan out money, because not everybody's going to come and get the money at the same time. And then you get fractional reserve banking, and then you get a federal or a central bank, and then you get excesses, and you get huge bubbles, like having bubbles much more frequent and much larger bubbles now. And eventually the bubbles are just going to dominate, and every bubble becomes more severe than the last one.
Ed, I think for some people listening, I could see some in the audience already building up a criticism in their mind. And I think what people need to understand is that you're not, some people might be thinking, oh, Ed Seykota, he sounds bearish, or he sounds like a doom and gloomer. Whereas you are taking a very distinct perspective to where, like, look, I'm observing the system as it is. You're very clear about it. You're saying, you can't really worry about it. You can't stop it. And I think, and you're not trying to make a prediction of the timing of something. You're just objectively trying to analyze the economy that we all are in the middle of.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything wrong with it. I think this is the way it works. And that's basically what we do in the trading tribe, is we look at, how can we be more effective as people in coping with the environment? If you'd been around 100 years ago, or maybe back in the early 1800s, a whole different economy. You want to get out there and build machines, start factories, and hire people and participate in the greatest economic miracle ever. These days it's different. It's a different. And there certainly are pockets of innovation. There are very bright people coming up with whole new industries. You got drones flying around that we didn't have before, and lots of advances. So there certainly are people innovating, but by and large, a lot of people are out of work, and you have a huge dependent class, and you have a huge amount of moral hazard in the economic system, and you have a disconnect between our governance and people. People don't even believe what the politicians are telling them anymore. So you have a whole different economy and a whole different society, and it's just part of the evolution. And you can find all kinds of books about what we ought to do to fix things. I don't think there's anything to fix. I think it's just how it works. And and there's always people that think we should fix things. It's one of the symptoms of this transition we're going through. Is there's people that want to, go out there in the fall and pick up the leaves and glue them back on the trees because they liked it better in the spring when the leaves were green and on the trees. But you can't glue the leaves back on the trees. You just have to accept the fall for the beauty that's there and move with it. So that's what we do in the trading tribe, is we try to, what can we do with our own attitudes and our own responses to cope with whatever the flow is, not try to change things, pretend they're different. What can we do to go with the flow? In other words, to use trend following in our own personal lives.
I know you look at trend following from not only from a trading perspective, but your own life perspective.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to really be a trend follower, you're going to have a lot of trouble limiting it to one area, because let's say you have a trend following system. You say, well, okay, I'm gonna have a diversified portfolio, a trend following portfolio. So I'm going to free myself up from emotions. Emotions have always been the big problem here. So I'm going to have a diversified trend following portfolio, or I'm going to invest in somebody else's portfolio, and that's going to fix this emotional problem. And then what happens? Well, their investment or their portfolio goes up and down. And then I get emotional problems with that. So you don't really fix your emotions by having a system. What you do is you just move them upstream. You move them upstream instead of you have constituents within the portfolio that used to bother you and they went up and down. And then now you have a portfolio that goes up and down. You just move the problem upstream. So ultimately you have to say, well, what is it that I'm feeling, and what do I do when I feel these things, and can I come up with better and more useful or productive ways of responding when the thing goes up and down? And eventually you've got to come to terms with that. And so the best trend followers, I think, are the ones that have made peace with themselves and have said, well, this is what I do in the case of things going up and down, the value increasing and decreasing. This is how I behave, and this is how I act. And of course, as you know, there are all kinds of things you can do when things go up. Some people, when something goes up, they sell them. Some people, when things go up, they buy. And when they keep going up, some people sell more and some people buy more. And if you go to extreme in either of those cases, you're counterproductive, self-destructive. You've got to know how to do that, and you've got to do it consistently. You've got to do it in your personal life. I think if you do these things in your personal life as well, it supports a trend following. Because if you're not in alignment between your overall philosophy and how you behave as a person, and you try to do trend following, well, there's going to be conflicts. And so we in trading tribe, we hardly ever talk about actual trading or what the markets are doing. What we're working with is the emotional reaction to volatility, or emotional reaction to loss, or to structure or authority, or all these other issues. People straighten these things out. Their relationships with their significant others and their children get better. They report more satisfaction in all areas of life. And incidentally, their trading is getting better, and they don't quite know how that happened, but it's just they've turned into a person that now can cope with uncertainty and can cope with volatility, and they couldn't do it before. And you can't, in my opinion, you can't take a system and use that to medicate your feelings. You've got to get your feelings. And some people say, well, I'm just going to suppress my feelings, stiff upper lip approach, or grin and bear it, or clench your teeth and hope for the best. I tend to go the other way. You try to say, what's the positive intention of these feelings? Celebrate them, find out the positive intention, and as soon as you do that, the feeling disappears and you go on to the next feeling. So I'm more of the go with the flow on the feelings as well. So there's a lot of different approaches. But by now, after we've been doing this a couple decades, we're developing a body of knowledge of how to do this. And to what extent can we actually reprogram response patterns? We're getting pretty good at this. As we've got, and you can follow what we're doing. I put it all on the blog at Trading Tribe at tradingtribe.com. All this is free if people want to go on there and look at it. And we're documenting the growth of all kinds of people who are using this technology, and it seems to be, to the extent they use it, it seems to be working pretty well for them.
It always just seems like to me that the place that one is trying to find is just some peace and contentment. And there's this just, again, I start off with giving you the praise of the clear thinking. I think that's to just be able to sit in a room and not feel, I mean, you're not to have this anxiety and worrying constantly. And if one has that, to work on that. And I think it's just trying to find it. I see a lot of parallels to your work and some of the meditation. I read some of the Zen scholars like Alan Watts. It seems like there's some commonalities with some of your work and the Eastern thought process.
I believe every feeling has a positive intention. For instance, if you're in a house and you smell smoke, you hear crackling sounds and notice the temperature going up in the room, and you conclude that maybe the house is on fire, that would be a really good time to feel anxiety and to take some action in response to it. So I'm not so sure that you want to, medicate your mind, anesthetize yourself and put yourself into some meditative state where you don't respond. That's not really what I'm saying. I think you want to notice the feeling you're having in the moment and act appropriately. And you want to learn the difference between medicating a feeling and responding to it proactively. So it's not always, I'm not suggesting you always aim towards peacefulness. Sometimes you want to get busy. You might want to get busy and put a trade on, or you might want to get busy and take some corrective action, some risk control, or you might want to take some action and get into some opportunity. But whatever it is, I think you can learn to come into harmony with your feelings. And to some extent, it's nice to just be able to be peaceful and watch your feelings and watch your mind and rest. It's important to rest particularly when you feel tired. But I don't recommend using either Trading Tribe technology, which I call TTP, Trading Tribe process, using that or anything else for medicinal purposes, like a drug or alcohol or a sedative. You have to watch out. There's a difference between using any of these technologies as a sedative, and I don't think any of the Zen masters really recommend blissing out and staying there permanently. I think they want to be responsive and proactive to whatever feeling arises in the moment.
I love the constant learning. What's the better way to handle expressing oneself? What's the better way there's always a better way to do it, right?
Well, I think so. I think I try. We're here in the moment, and I'm learning something. Learning something from you, and I'm trying to be responsive. And I'll think about this later, and I'll say, "Oh man, now I really could have said that better." But that's how life is. I do the best I can in the moment, and then go back and maybe do it differently next time, and try to learn. And study my responses and say, well, can I change the response? And then that's what we do in a Trading Tribe. We try to look at what our responses are to our feelings, and then we practice identifying, well, what is it we are doing? How are we getting the result we're getting? And can we change our response patterns and get different results next time around?
The only way you can learn is to extend yourself to perhaps in front of somebody that has more experience. And once you extend yourself, there's the chance that you might be forced to learn something that makes you feel like, wow, why did I just say it that way? I could have said it the way he just told me. But you want to get to the point of knowing the better way until you extend yourself with the wrong way.
Yeah, we find in the right environment, and we take a lot of care to set up the environment correctly. Once you set up an environment in which the goal is for people to help each other improve, I think this is true in the Trading Tribe, and some companies have this down pretty well too, some other organizations, where when personal growth becomes important, then when people correct you or offer advice, you say, thank you. Thank you for helping me learn something. In a lot of situations, somebody will correct you or give you advice, and then you get upset about it, and you may say something to protect yourself, or put them down, or swear at them, or tell them to keep their distance, or whatever. So it's a different environment where everyone is trying to grow and do a better job. And that's another thing we had. When you have an expansive economy and a company that's growing, and everybody's trying to do better, then the culture in that company, when you have growth, when you have a free competition society and free competition, you have a competitive startup firm, and somebody says to somebody else, there's a better way to do this, then they say, thank you for telling me. And they start doing it that way. When you get a survival company, one that's overly restrictive and political, and there's regulations, you better mind your own business and don't go talking to somebody else about what they should be doing. You see the whole environment, the whole structure. The environment in one case is pro personal growth and pro learning, and the other one is not. It's very territorial and very defensive. You can walk into companies, you can sense this right away. Some are open to grow, and then they get mature, and then if they start getting kind of the Gavopoly model, and they start going the other way, and they don't want to have, you offer advice at your own risk.
Ed, one of the things that you do in the Gavopoly book and your premise is you talk about the strategy of trend following. And I don't want to phrase it as a solution, but you offer trend following as a way to perhaps, a better phrasing is to cope with as we move towards this Gavopoly system that you see as inevitable. And trend following is, and perhaps there's other solutions, and I'd love to hear if you think there are. But as you talk about trend following as one kind of a way to cope, I would love for you to go back in time a little bit, if you will, and because you've had an interesting career, you've had some interesting mentors, interesting students. But I know when I mentioned this in my email, there's a couple traders in your early years that I think had a really strong influence on you. And I would love for you to share a little bit of wisdom or perhaps experience or thoughts or memories about two gentlemen in particular, if you wouldn't mind. And that'd be Amos Hofstadter and Richard Donchian. And Amos Hofstadter, he was at Commodities Corporation, and Richard Donchian at Hayden Stone, just two very accomplished early pioneers in the field of trend following. Would you share some wisdom?
I'll be glad to share what I know. I knew Donchian a lot better than Hofstadter, and Donchian had noticed this system. He noticed the 2-week rule in copper. 2-week rule meaning you buy something when it makes highs for 2 weeks, and you sell it when it makes lows for 2 weeks. And he just noticed this somehow, and he didn't remember exactly how he noticed it. I asked him once, how'd you come up with a 2-week rule? And he said, I don't exactly know, and you're the first person that's ever asked. He said he just kind of came up with it, as far as I can remember. And that was the start of the start of automated trend following was when he came up to the 2-week rule. And before that, you can look at some of Livermore's writings, and he had a system of pivot points and so forth. And there's other people that have talked about it. He basically started the 2-week rule. Now that won't work today. Back then you had a little different character of the markets. And the 2-week rule used to work in copper. And then we found that you had to lengthen those, and maybe you make the weeks longer, 6 weeks, or sometimes now they've got 30 or 40, 50 weeks, or much more than that. He had this system, and then he had a couple followers there in his office. He came up with a system. He didn't always follow it himself, but he had this system, and he had people on it, and he had people that were religiously following the system, and they seemed to do pretty well. And I came along, and I studied his rule set. He had Donchian's rules and Donchian's guidelines. And about that time, we had computers were starting to become within reach of people to use them. Although they didn't have personal computers, they did have mainframes at some companies. And I got, if you can believe this, I was I got to go into the major brokerage house at the time on the weekend, and I had access to their mainframe computers that they used to run the company. And I was in there, and there was a security guard, and there was me, and I had access to the complete computer base of the whole company. And I was just using it to do computer testing.
Were you pinching yourself at that time?
No, I thought it was just normal. I said, well, I want to do this research, and they said, okay. And nobody would, in those days, nobody ever thought about anybody trying to go in there and do anything nefarious. I was just in there doing research. No one would even, in those days, you wouldn't even think about something like that. But these days, you couldn't get anywhere close to the inner workings of a brokerage house. These days, you couldn't do it. But in those days, I did the computer testing on the mainframe computer of the brokerage house, and all of their discs and all their history and everything. They were just sitting around in this big room. It was a huge room, and all these mainframe computers and these big tape drives and so forth. It was just, now you can get probably all the computational power in that whole room. Probably you got more computational power in your cell phone now. In those days, that was quite the thing. So I would run back tests, and I would do a back test that you could do now in probably a second or two. It would take half hour, 45 minutes to do one set of tests. And I was using punch cards, and it was a different era back then.
Did you find it unusual, or what were your feelings at the time? Because there weren't a huge number of peers that you could bounce ideas off. I mean, you said you knew Dick Donchian, but there wasn't this. I mean, today there's a much wider network, and people are connected on the internet. They can reach out to you at FAQs, but there was no FAQs for you back then.
No, and I took Donchian's work, and he had a letter that he would publish every week. He would publish a letter which would have his rules on it, and it would also have a kind of a model account, and you could follow along. And the idea was you would follow along and you would place your orders with him. I guess that was the way that was supposed to work. So I tested his rules, and I came back and said, well, the rules internally are not consistent. The rules you can't program all these rules at the same time because they conflict with each other. So I started taking rule sets that were non-conflicting, and I tried to tune it up and see, well, here's what we can do. And I would try different experiments with the rules, and I would check it with some brokers and traders in the office. And a lot of times I say, well, I'm going to change this. I'm going to make the system less responsive, so the market has to go up more before you start to buy it. So make the time constants longer. And people would say, well, that's going to make it more risky because your stop's going to be further away. And then we would test it, and we would get the exact opposite result. So all these things were very counterintuitive. I did some of the first testing, and you're right, there wasn't any other standard. Now I've got this on my website. If you or your listeners want to go on the website and replicate some of these tests to learn how to do it, I've got it on there, and there's a template, and you can do it on your Excel spreadsheet or whatever. And then enough people have done it so they all get the same result to the penny. So I'm pretty confident I've got the right answer up there. But in those days, no, there wasn't anybody else. I was just curious, and I said, well, how does this work? And Donchian had set it up as a system. I said, well, okay, I'm going to simulate it. I'll go back in the computer and see if I get the same results that Donchian's getting, and I'll try to set up a diversified portfolio. And we did that, and the company I was with marketed it for a while, and we had a diversified portfolio, and it was all run on computer by a service bureau. I had a service bureau, and we would enter the data every day and then get the result, and then we would put the orders in. But the company couldn't stick to it. The company I was with couldn't stick to it. And they also couldn't resist the temptation of trying to get the customers to trade more often than the system wanted them to trade. Because the problem with the system was it worked, and it made money for the clients. But the problem was it made far less money for the brokerage house, because they were used to day traders, and they were used to people coming in and lasting a few months and then losing their money and moving on and doing something else. And so that's the way the brokerage house set up. People would come in and try to trade, lose their money and leave. And here was something else. They would come in and they didn't believe they were going to stay. And they said, well, commissions are like a tenth of what they used to be. They're staying with positions. And this is going to wreck our business model. And so there was all kinds of pressures to get people to trade more often. And then there was all kinds of pressures, like you pointed out in some of your letters to me. There was, they've got fancy names for it now, like disposition effect. But in those days, people just didn't want to hold on to something. It was went up a little bit, and they want to take their profit. Went down a little bit, and they wanted to add more and hope it would go back up. And so you had lots of pressures against following systems in those days. So I had invented something that no one really wanted. And so then I left and I went out on my own, found clients, and I found that some of the most important things was developing a relationship with the clients, that they really knew what to expect and they knew what was going on. Because if the client was not aligned to it, and if you didn't have emotional rapport and understand the system is more than the mathematics. The system is the mathematics plus the willingness to follow the system. And when you increase your worldview to include the investor himself and his emotional responses to what's going on, when you finally get the system include everything, you can design a system that works. But just going into a computer and tuning up your software and saying, well, here's the right set of parameters. Well, great. You've got something that theoretically will work for some theoretical robot that'll follow it. But there aren't a whole lot of robots that got money these days. Maybe someday, but right now you've got human beings with human feelings. And unless you include that into your system design, the thing's going to, the wheels are going to come off the cart around the corner.
Yeah, I think you really sum up so much of your ethos in those last few sentences for those that are paying attention. I'm curious, Ed, too. I want just a couple more questions. I won't keep you. But as you talk about, we're talking today about your research into developing this Gavopoly model. You're talking about your early research with trend following models. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've been highly motivated by the puzzle aspect of just figuring things out.
Yeah, I guess I like puzzles. I've got a huge collection of what you might call barroom puzzles, or these metal detanglement puzzles where you have metal pieces that fit together and you got to figure out how to get them apart and together. I've got a huge collection of those, and I in the morning I do chess puzzles, and I like figuring things out. It's always been something that I enjoy doing. I don't know exactly where that comes from. I think it's been I've been able to incorporate that in my life in such a way that it's useful. But yeah, I think that the puzzle aspect of what I did in the markets, or what I did with the Gavopoly book, what's driven me is I want to understand how it works. I want to know how it works. Then it works and it makes money. That's great. I mean, it's nice to make money, but I think I wouldn't have done it in the first place. Maybe figured out some other way of making money. But the puzzle was what got me. I said, I got to figure this out. Why does this guy Donchin has got this thing that's mechanical, it's making money? How can that be? How can you get something that's mechanical that can make money for nothing without doing any work? How can that be? And so I kind of got attracted to looking at it, but I don't think I would have gone into it. I wouldn't have gone into it for just the money. It was the puzzle. It was how does this work? I mean, how does this actually work? Can I build a model, and can I understand this? And then when you understand it, then it becomes interesting to explain it to people for a while, or then you put it on the website, or you write a book, and you go on and you look for a new puzzle. So
I mean, when you were back in the day, though, and you're in those mainframe rooms and you're by yourself and you're struggling. I mean, there's got to be a struggle, of course, to try and figure this all out. I mean, what was your was it just pure excitement at the time, and you're this internal excitement that was driving you to just keep going and going till you got the puzzle solved?
Well, that's a good question. That's one of the best questions I've ever heard. What motivates somebody who's a researcher? What motivates them to go? I don't. You say, well, is it the pleasure of the puzzle, or is it the discomfort and not knowing? I think it's deeper than that. It's just, that's what I do. That's what I do. I do that, and I play banjo, and I get lost in it. Mm. That's my meditation. I have to do it. If I can't play music, something dies. And same with solving puzzles. That's who I am, and that's what I do. And I don't think of it as there's something that pushes me to do it. That's just who I am, and that's what I have to do.
Yeah. I still feel like I'm in training wheels, but I sometimes feel like my career is the same way. I don't necessarily know why. I'm just driven to do what I do, and I'm not necessarily sure what I even do, but I just do it.
Yeah, I like that, and you're good at it. And you're that's one of the places I think we succeed in the tribe, when we get people to this place you're at, where you find out who you are and what you do, and you just do it, and you express yourself, and you create a value by expressing exactly who you are, not pretending to be somebody else. That's a very high state. Congratulations for being there. It'd be a different world if everybody could get there, and I would hope people would follow in your footsteps, and I've watched your career over many years, and I've seen you keep expanding and getting closer to who you are, and now you're really blooming, and you're really making a big contribution. So, good job.
Well, I tell you though, for those that don't know, you I'm not gonna tell the exact story, but you influenced me greatly when I met you for the first time in 2001, and I can still remember some of the things that you said to me. And I think for some people, they might have felt threatened. And I don't think I felt threatened. I probably was like, okay, what has he just said to me? Why is he saying it? What's the deeper meaning? So in many ways, as you talk about your love of puzzles, I felt like you were giving me a puzzle. Michael, you might want to consider this. Ba, 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 ba. And so then, of course, I just considered that. And you didn't give specific instructions. You gave some big picture insights. And I think that's probably how you like to be. I think you just want to see if there's more puzzle finders out there.
Yeah. And like, you're open. You wanted to do something. You wanted to go somewhere. You were like on a growth path. And then you viewed ideas from me and other people. And you've surrounded yourself with an amazing group of people who have amazing amount of ability and knowledge and wisdom and resources. You've surrounded yourself with one of the most advanced group of mentors I think is possible. You just like to do that. So I think you had an attraction. You attracted people like that, and you enjoyed hearing what they have to say. The people that are on your podcast, people in your life, all are people with strong opinions, all people that make you think and make you grow. And you just have some kind of a affinity for people like that. And that's part of what makes you good at what you do.
Well, if they keep talking to me, I should keep talking to them. That seems like a good rule. If really smart people will agree to talk to me, I should probably talk to them, because then I wouldn't be that smart.
Well, I mean, it seems to be working. It seems to be working.
Well, listen, hey, you are. I've kept you for too long. Hopefully, you will get on and have some conversations more regularly. I think I think you could appreciate. I'm sure you feel this, that the flow of our conversation, because we haven't really caught up on the phone for a long time. You can feel the flow improve as the conversation goes on, which is fun. So it takes a while to get into it, and then
takes a while to turn it off again. So
yeah, it's time to turn it off now. So, hey, listen, Ed, I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody can make it to seykota.com, SEYKOTA.com, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for making me think, and I enjoy listening to you and talking to you. You always make me think, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ed. You always make me think as well. Appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Damn, where does time fly when you're having fun? 900 episodes. What the F? Started this in early 2012. It's 2020. I'm somewhere in parts unknown. Little reverence to Mr. Bourdain. Rest in peace. 900 episodes. Yeah. Joe Rogan's got me beat, but Joe's making a boatload of money off his podcast. I'm going to have to switch it off to video at some point in time. It's just a lot of damn work. I would love to hear an interview with Joe about doing the video all the time. I mean, producing a show on video versus producing a show on a podcast, light years difference. A podcast is easy if you got good guests. If the host is, maybe somewhat competent, maybe not completely off his rocker, then maybe you got something. But damn, that video stuff, I don't know how people do it. I mean, I know how they do it. You get the setup. This is why Joe has the studio. He just rolls in, hangs out with his buddies or other guests that become his buddies, and you turn the cameras on. It's a great setup, but it's a lot of damn work. I give Rogan all the credit in the world. It ain't easy. Now, I'm not saying 900 podcast episodes with a gazillion different guests of all different types of expertise is easy either, but it gets easier. There becomes a certain rhythm to talking to people. I remember starting only with trading guests and then flipping to everybody under the sun. I like to tell the story, and I tell it on this podcast all the time. Once Daniel Kahneman said yes, the Nobel Prize winning psychologist, that for me was, I could ask anybody. Because if I could get Kahneman to come on, hell, the worst that somebody can say to me is no. F you, Mike, I'm not coming on. That doesn't bother me at all. I could care less. I mean, I could care in the sense that if I ask somebody, that means I want to have them. But if they say no, I still sleep like a damn baby. My guest today is a longtime friend. I believe I sat down with him for the first time in his house in 2005. Central Park South. Larry Height. He might have been Central Park on the west side when I first met him, and then he moved. Larry is a trader. Larry was first featured in Jack Schwager's Market Wizards, one of those voices along with Ed Seykota that you just don't forget. Even before you hear his voice in person, his thinking, his writing on the page, you don't forget. And that first Market Wizards book, all the credit to Jack and his traders that he found and put together, that's a classic. And Larry's right in there. Now, I've also featured Larry in some of my books, Trend Following, The Little Book of Trading. He was in my film, Broke the New American Dream. He's been on this podcast many times. I did a foreword for his first book last year called The Rule. And he happens to be my guest, number 900 today. Now, we actually did this conversation on Zoom, but both of us were kind of set up bad. So we have some video, but we both look kind of out of it. So I think all you're going to get is some audio. But like Larry does every time, there's that nugget. There's that way that he says something where you just walk away saying, okay, I'm inspired. If he can do it, I can do it. Maybe you don't get the Larry Height success. Maybe you get close. Maybe you don't get close. It doesn't matter. It's the wisdom. You take the wisdom, you take a shot, and that's all you can do. Because if you don't take a shot, what do you got? You're just somebody sitting around talking at the bar, some bullshitter. So damn it, turn on the headphones, turn on the podcast, whatever you do to listen. and give my guest number 900, Larry Height, a little bit of attention. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let me start you off today, though. You're not 18. I'm not 18. But I talk to a lot of young people. A lot of young people, they come on my social media. Their attitude, sometimes I can feel this kind of negative attitude. And I kind of look at it like, if you're alive, you got a chance to do something. So the question I have from you right at the start, why such a good attitude? Why do you have a good attitude?
Because my grandmother, my father's father, my father's mother, had a good attitude. And it came from her to my father to me. And more importantly, the only sensible, skip the curse word, the F thing to do is be positive. Because let's say you're so negative, you never try. If you never try, you got 100% chance of failing. This goes from picking up girls to getting into school, 0 trying, 0 results. If you are inept, as you know I was as an athlete, as you know I had dyslexia, when you try, you have better than a 0 chance. And that's the only logical way to go.
I don't know. You tell me these stories about you not being an athlete. How do I know they're not true? You could have been some star New York City track guy. I don't know. You're just kind of making up these stories 60 years later that you weren't a star.
I was less than a star. No, it's just, I'm not writing this book, but I've been going around talking to people. Yesterday, I talked to the guy who was a major hockey player since he was 7. And then from a young age, he was somebody colleges looked at. He was in a car. The car had a head-on collision. His best friend died, broke vertebrae in his back. So I went to see this guy because I'm interested in how did he come back? What made him come back after that? He had an attitude. He knew that if he didn't try, he'd have nothing. I once told you the story that this guy, I told you about Harry. All Harry would do was walk up to really good-looking girls, say, Harry and I seem to have jobs of no account. We left late. Only Harry left with a beautiful girl. And I left with either my girlfriend at the time or nothing. Give more weight into nothing than a beautiful girl. Harry and I became friends. Days of marijuana. I could get marijuana cheaper, so we became friends. I said, how do you get these beautiful women? Now I'm like 28. And he says, oh, every time I see a gorgeous woman, I go up to her and say, my name's Harry. Let's have coffee. Then he said, Larry, 1 out of 10 who go to coffee wind up again, 1 out of 8 sleeping over. Now, to a 28-year-old horny kid, these are my 2 favorite subjects, sex and probabilities. I really began to understand my grandmother because if you don't try, you get 0. If you try, you can do very well. That to me is not a positive attitude, but a practical attitude.
So many people think of trying in their head failing in their head and do nothing.
Correct. But what does that get you?
Nothing.
Right. Right. So I figured the odds. Being, you know me, I then started off with beautiful girls. I remember the first beautiful girl I went to. I walked up to her and I said, if I would design a woman, she'd look like you. She came back and slept over.
The first shot.
First shot, beginner's luck. Then, well, all commodity traders are successful, are compulsive. So then I went to ugly girls. And I found out I didn't do quite as well with ugly girls as pretty girls. But I actually made counts because that's what works.
Beyond the probability, there's something else you're bringing up there too, which is to approach a beautiful woman who is often not approached. People don't realize that. She might like that attitude you're bringing. She likes that moxie that you're bringing.
Well, she's horny. I don't know why. And I saw that. I actually wanted to talk to you about Amazon.
You're talking about horny girls. You want to talk about Amazon, but you're talking about being horny and girls. I can't control you.
I can go anyway, because there was the article that you wrote. It wasn't an interview, and it was that Jeff Bezos is an across-the-board trader.
A trend follower.
A trend follower. Well, I thought about that, and it's true. I'm 80 next April, and I was telling my friend Max, I've had maybe 2 losing years. One of them was because the people at Man, who I like and loved and made a lot of money with, wanted to take the leverage up. That was not a good idea. Trend following is great. It's made me who I am. I'm in Aspen in the biggest suite in the hotel, but trend following has always worked for me. And when I read your article, I looked at what Bezos had going for him. First of all, he didn't have to put up any money. You're looking puzzled, but he really didn't.
Hold on, I'm looking puzzled?
Yeah.
This is like the first video interview that I have ever done for the podcast.
Really?
True. It's easier to do audio because video, you have to set all this stuff up, but Zoom is making it easy now.
They didn't have to. Michael Dell saw this right from his room in college. The kid who bought the computer from him uses his credit card. Bezos and that guy, and now almost everybody, gets paid before the delivery. I couldn't figure out them at all. I'm in really good company because Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Larry Haight, and I was with a guy today, none of us could figure out what Bezos was doing. He built his infrastructure for speed. He didn't have to put out money. It was really, but it took me years to figure that out.
Larry, you're making the case that essentially being a good entrepreneur is being a trend follower, and being a trend follower is being a good entrepreneur.
Well, who are the richest people around?
They follow trends. I mean, no one gets to be Jeff Bezos rich unless something big comes from nowhere and goes to the moon.
Correct. If I may tell you, I work with this incredible guy. He went to Wharton. He was all on scholarship, both as a football player and as a scholar. He's just one of those annoying people. I told him about the 52-week high. He came out to Colorado to visit me because his wife was prepping the house to sell in Texas, big university there. His wife said, go visit Larry. So they come in, and he says, hey, it worked. When I say so much bullshit, I said, what? What he did was he took the 52-week high, and if it dropped down 5%, he got out the first time. If it went back up, he got in. He was wrong 85% of that time. 85%. He turned $1 million in the simulation into 20. 20. Average 20% a year. You know, from the book I read, was pure David Ricardo. Get rid of your losses. And that's why I called it the rule.
For average people, if you got 85% losers, for average people, that's disappointing. If you have average psychology, average understanding of the markets, 85% losses sounds frightening, horrifying to the average person. If they don't have Larry Height's superpowers, it sounds terrible.
But no, Larry Height was lucky enough. You visited my house, you know. I have a computer. My friend did that with a small computer. First of all, he's a multimillionaire to begin with. So he was doing it just to see if what I said works. And he's mathematical. He knows the law of large numbers.
He wanted to test you?
No, he just one of these rare people who's a man of action, real good athlete, scholarship, and he does. Where other people talk, he does.
How does you, maybe myself in some ways, how do you get around disappointment? How do you take an average person who doesn't have your lucky experience, as you call it, and get around disappointment?
Because I went with a guy. Do you know Harold Janine, who's head of
I do not.
Billionaire. He invites me to lunch. I'm 30. He met me through another friend. And he says to me, I mean, he's now like, he could have been my grandfather. He says to me, Larry, he bought telephone companies all over the effing world. He said, buying companies, Larry, is not like going to the movies. Now, I'm sitting with a billionaire. I don't want to be a dummy, but I'm not making the connection between movies and buying companies. So I say, Harold, I'm a little slow here. Could you wind back and explain this to me? He said, Larry, you go to the movies, you buy a ticket, and then you sit down in the movie and you sit there till the movie ends. He says, when I buy a company, before I give the money, I have to know how the end is going to be. We can take a computer and we can make a database. We can test. Once you have that, I'm sitting here with my friend Max. He does a lot of nice things for me, but he won't take any money. I'm showing him how to do counts. Before I do something, I've done thousands of counts. So I don't have to have courage. I just have to know to add. Let's face it, Mike, you know most of the top players. Very few people need great mathematical skill to do the trend following. I mean, you got to add, divide, and know how to do probability. How many guys have you spoke to use calculus?
To be a trend follower?
Yeah.
None. Surely some of them know how to do it exactly, but it's not relevant to what they're doing with their trading.
Right. Any 12-year-old kid could do all the math necessary. Probably an 8-year-old, because it's averages, probability, and most of all, risk management.
That's why you're here today, right?
Having been dyslexic, blind in one eye, half blind another idea, I'd be either a broken down comedian or a floor washer.
Hold on, let's see. If you did not have risk management, you would be a broken down comedian or a floor washer. That is a fantastic quote from one of the best trend following traders, a broken down comedian or floor washer.
But you got to see what it is. You learn these things. Look, you and I are very good friends. One of the most fun people I ever speak to. Yes, it was one time I called you by mistake at 4:00 in the morning here. And then I was I really wanted to go to sleep. You remember this incident. But I was so embarrassed.
But hold on, I'm on the other side of the planet. So for me, it was the middle of the afternoon.
That's why I started it. But you and I are very good friends because of communication, right?
What kind of communication?
Well, I don't know. We talked about everything. We talked about your thing in politics. I remember you were a catcher. You talk trash talk all the time.
I never talk any shit, Larry.
I'm from Brooklyn, and most of you people who aren't from New York sound to us Brooklyn people like you're talking shit all the time.
I got to tell you, as you're saying this, though, when I first started to come to New York, maybe in the, I don't know, early 2000s, I think, something, been there maybe once or twice, but once I started to get friends from New York, it's a really interesting thing because for most of my life, people are pretty tame. The Washington, D.C. area, people are pretty middle of the road. I've got a salty tongue. I'll drop the F-bombs. I'll say that stuff. Then when I get to New York, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, my tribe has been up here all along hiding from me.
Yeah. I'll tell you a test I did. I think I must have told you this before. So I'm doing my group was the first $1 billion across the board trade to reach $1 billion.
A fund, CTA commodity fund.
Yeah. Peter, my partner, said, we have a great system. I said, no. He said, but what do you mean? I said, Alex Kraserman, who I'm still very good friends, and we own a lot of real estate together. I get Alex in, I said, here's what I want you to do. We're doing 3,200 trades a year. Set up a random number generator that will pick what to trade, when to get in. But one thing that couldn't be random was when to get out.
So random trades, random entry, and a hard stop.
Correct. So I do this, and it comes out better than our system, right? I thought that was really interesting. And I have a philosophy called leverage, asymmetrical leverage. Think about a stop. When you go in and buy a new high, just to say, you put your stop in, or even better than that, you buy a call. You know exactly what you're going to lose, but you don't know how much you're going to make. It was an asymmetrical bet. You could lose $2 and you could have bought Amazon and gone up 500%.
Hey, let me keep you at that point with the fund with Alex and the random system. So you have Alex put together a random system, random entry, random market selection, a fixed hard stop. It does better than the fund that you are promoting to all these clients that has raised $1 billion. And you're sitting here in the office looking at a random system and you know it's better, but because of the way the fund management world works, you can't really tell your client base, we've got this random system because they won't buy it.
Right. But I had learned something very better than money. I learned how to bet. And I learned the fallacy of a magic way. The magic way is getting yourself into a position, and every entrepreneur, I don't care who it was, who makes real money, gets into a position where they can lose a small amount and make a big amount. That's the game. It's exactly what Bezos does. If he tries a product and it doesn't work, he gets rid of it.
Now, just look, because of the law, various mathematical laws, not everybody is going to become Bezos. That's not the issue. The issue is for your life, can you do much better in your life? Maybe you'll be the next Bezos, but probably not. But can you do much better in your life with his strategy than not? And the answer is clearly yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story. So we have his friend, two friends, meet at the Aspen Ideas Festival, which is something I tell you got to do. It's the only place I've ever been where consistently the audience is as smart or smarter than worldwide expert. That's the place. I come here, meet these people. He's a doctor, retired surgeon. She runs a big educational company. Surgeons are by nature picky people. You want a surgeon to look very carefully at what he's doing.
Very precise people.
He builds her a portfolio. Becomes worth a couple $1 million. She's in a beauty parlor. The women are in a panic over the disease, the virus. They're all going to sell their stock.
Let me set this up really quick though, Larry. So you got the friend, she knew somebody who was smart, helped her get a portfolio. The portfolio is many millions of dollars, and she goes to the beauty shop. All the ladies are worried about COVID, and now she wants to sell.
And she sells everything but the gold. So her husband, he said, I'm out of managing your money. I've spent years doing this. I made you rich. I am not going to F this again. She calls me up, says, Larry, what do I do with the gold? And she calls me several times. I said, well, you want to know the real truth? Sell the gold and buy Amazon. Why did I say this? Gold can only do three things. It can go up, it can go down, or it can stand still. The one thing you can possibly make more money power is it goes up faster than inflation. Because with trillions of dollars worth of debt, the only sensible thing the United States can do be keep as a world leader, it cannot default on the debt. So if you're not defaulting on the debt, what's the most intelligent thing to do? Inflate out. You inflate out, you're still a leader. The whole thing about money is buying power.
Now, listen, if you're wrong here, if you're wrong on this economic political prescription, you've got a stop loss. I mean, your ego's not here. If you're saying this is how it can unfold and it doesn't unfold that way, you're prepared to go the other way.
Always. I'm not here to prove I'm a guru. Do this because I said, I'd rather have 1,000 bets than one bet. There are many ways for Jeff Bezos to win. There's only one way for the gold to win. That it outpaces inflation. It's the only way. If it keeps up with inflation, you're nowhere.
You know what's funny about gold? How many people, Larry, in the last, let's say, 40 years or whatnot, are still influenced by that 1979, 1980 gold move? They always just think that that exact same thing is going to happen. That keeps so many people fixated on gold.
And that's why I had a good friend of mine who was a very good arbitrager. I'm on the phone with him. Silver's very high. He says, well, it can't go down. I said, I don't see why it can't go down. Why is it written? And he gave me 20 facts. I said, well, it's dropped below the 30-day low. So clearly it can go down because there it was down. That's a fact. Look, I'm talking to my friend Max 2 days ago because he set this all up for me. Without him, I would not. And I said, I like numbers more than charts, but I started out as a chartist. The market tells you stuff. It really does. If you fail to make a new high and the next low is lower than the previous high, that's going down. The market is right there on paper. Failed one, went lower than the next low. I only have one eye, but I could see that. It's not, I like numbers because with numbers I could do probabilities. I'm on a plane with somebody, sitting in first class. She tells me she lives in New York. She got adopted by, after the war, rabbis in New York went to the builders and said there's a lot of Jewish, or they think it's Jewish, orphans. She was adopted by a New York builder. When it was all over, she is worth $500 million. She says, I'm putting half of it in gold in Switzerland. I said, look, if they start throwing atomic bombs around, how the fuck are you going to get to Switzerland?
No, hold on. In her defense, atomic bombs at Switzerland so far has not happened. So far.
Look, you spend a lot of time in Chicago. You used to.
Right.
Chicago has a lot of murders. In Chicago, it's very easy to buy a gun on the street. The gun of choice in the last couple of years is a Glock. You ever shoot a Glock?
I have.
Very fast gun. It's almost like a machine gun. You put one the trigger, brrr, take a 15-year-old boy with no father and a mother who works 3 jobs and a Glock, and the only family he has is other 15-year-old boys. Boys, Glocks equal murder. Because you're 15 years old, you don't know what you're doing, but you have this incredibly fast weapon. Certain things happen. So if you start to throw one bomb around, or several, very bad shit's gonna happen.
Your point there with the atomic bombs in Switzerland and whatnot is to get people to think about what's the worst case scenario. Because we did not think at one point in time that Chicago would have dozens of people dying per day, and now they're out there robbing on the Magnificent Mile. So things that we can never imagine can happen, is your point.
Yeah. Look, what's the most common thing in the markets?
Crazy.
No. You know the most common thing? The most fundamental thing. Most fundamental thing in the markets are people. If you don't have people, you don't have a market.
Well, people are crazy, though.
Yeah, people, no, but they're a special kind of crazy. People are herd animals, like sheep or cattle.
When you say that, though, if you think about it, people are like herd animals, like sheep, like cattle. That's another strike at the ego, isn't it?
But it happens to be true. It's true.
Years ago, Larry, when you were in my film, I actually went to a sheep farm to film those sheep for this very same reason, and to watch hundreds of sheep running together, and they were so frightened, and it was it didn't translate well to film, but in person, it was amazing to watch.
Yeah, and scary. And that's what happens. We have a mayor in New York City who's really stupid, and really corrupt and lazy. The lazy is his best trait because he does fewer stupid things. He decided to defund the police, the real street police. Magically, we're getting 8 to 10 kills a day. I don't know what to say about it.
It's what you were just saying a second ago about Chicago. How could one ever expect that all of Midtown Manhattan would be closed? They would be stealing at Saks. They would be defacing the churches. There would be violence everywhere. You've lived in New York for so long. You've got a great place there. Back to the lady example that wanted to put the gold in Switzerland. Your point is, imagine it. It can happen.
Because it does.
Crazy things happen.
Crazy things happen. All the good managers in our business are not bold, crazy people. They are very good risk takers. By the way, I'll tell you a great Ed Secoda story. I had a partner who hid a trade, comes into our lawyer's office and says, I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to jump out the window. Okay? He hid his trade. He was the inside guy. I was the outside guy. So I had to go home and tell my wife that we could be bankrupt. As it turned out, I turned it around. This is a great kind of a Jewish story. I was brought up as most immigrants. You notice there are immigrant neighborhoods in every major city because they all flock to where they know people. I was brought up and told since I was 3 years old that it was my job to support my parents and my grandparents. Couldn't argue with that because my father supported his mother, my mother's mother, and my rich uncle put everybody in the family chipped in to help us. My Italian friends all bought a house 3 generations would go in. My father got an apartment for my grandmother. So this was my job. I'm an only child to support them. Considering I was shitty at school, shitty at sports, I knew I had to be rich. So that was my goal. That's what I had to do. And in Brooklyn, the mafia was considered like the Knights of Columbus.
The good guys. It's how the world was.
Yeah, that's right. You can't today, if you haul garbage from a manufacturer, you can only haul it from the guy who works that thing. You didn't get it hauled by them. You get a dump back on your stand. There were unions. The union guys knew my father's business as well as he did. The guy would come, hey, George, you got a problem. They want to have a strike. And they knew that my father's absolute time that he had to be open, otherwise he missed the season. But I tell you, George, you're a friend of mine. I always liked you. I think I could get this settled for you for $10,000. Was my father angry? No. My father said to me, that's the cost of doing business. And that's the world I grew up in. My father wasn't a criminal, but if he wanted to get something done, had to do that. I always knew that it was my job to support him, no matter what. I support a cousin. I give her $10,000 a year, which one thing she has to promises me that she won't call me because she's so depressing to talk to.
You're so bad. Hey, I got to tell you on the union story, to share one back with you. Early 20s, mid 20s, I was assisting one of those conference events that you used to attend in Chicago. And it was at one of the fancy hotels downtown Chicago. John Henry was speaking. This is before the speech. So I'm in an empty hall with a couple organizers, and we're kind of setting things up before everybody comes in. And someone looked at me and they said, Mike, walk over there and turn the lights on over on the side of the hall. Now, there's probably like 1,000 people go in this hall. So I start to walk over to turn the lights on. Some guy starts screaming at me, don't you dare touch that light switch. Only a union member could turn those lights on.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, I thought it was stupid. I still think it was stupid. But the reality is, even if something's dumb, it can still be real. And if it's real, it's the cost of doing business. And if it's the cost of doing business, don't argue with the cost of doing business. Just do the damn business, because we can't solve everything in life.
Right. Exactly. I called my father and I said, look, I got a problem. I owe $7 million more than I have. And my father says to me, no, Larry, you don't have the problem. The guy you owe the money to has the problem.
He framed it in a different way.
Yeah. I go in to see the guy. He's a bond trader. And he starts to talk tough to me. New Yorkers don't know how to talk any other way. So the guy starts to walk towards me. I turn to him and say, stop. The best thing you could do is kill me. So I am not afraid of you at all.
The worst thing he can do is kill you.
No, it would be best. I'd solve all the fucking problem. Right?
But he won't have his money if you're dead. There's no money if you're dead.
That's what I explained to him. The only way you get paid if I can convince these other guys to put more money in. He, being a Southerner, but very bright guy, he says, yeah, what are we going to do? His partner walks in. It's the coolest thing. He started with the tough guy routine. He turned to his partner and said, Larry and I did that dance already. I worked it out.
I think what you're giving is kind of a lesson of thinking about how to frame issues, to solve problems, and to try and take the emotion to the side. And if you can put the emotion to the side, there's a way to get both sides to where they can best get for that point in time.
Sometimes emotions work, but under real pressure, they might not work. But when you're across the board trader, I could trade anything. I think this guy's a really smart guy, but we have to, as good traders, control our emotions. There's no better way to control your emotions than have a method, because then you know what to do. When I thought I was going broke, do you remember the King Biscuit Flower Hour?
I do. All the rock bands.
Right. My cousin put that together, invented that. I knew a woman named Mary Alberti. She went to Wharton. She was very smart. I was feeling very depressed because of my partner and what to do. She said, oh, I have a friend you should talk to, Ed Zakota. So I called Ed Zakota up. She had called. He said, I could see you 2 Thursdays from now at 1:00. I go into the King Biscuit Flower House studio. My cousin gives me a studio and a mic so I could be clear, and Ed Zakota. And he says to me, look, it's a really simple business. Decide how much you're willing to lose and go with the trend. I knew that. I've done more simulations than the years the Jewish people have lived, more than 5,000 simulations. So he was telling me something that I knew, and I felt great.
He's a really magical guy in that kind of a way.
He's a magical guy in all kinds of ways.
Remember, I think it was 2012. Gosh, time flies, right? 2012, you, me, Ed on stage in Chicago. That was quite fun.
And with his guitar.
Yeah. Banjo.
A banjo. I said, and he said, look, it doesn't matter. You could have a 2% stop, 5% stop, a 10%, but you got to keep to the discipline. I knew that. I knew that as well as anybody. I've been always thankful to him for that. And it was certainly an honor to be with him.
I think I met him for the first time in 2001. Look, I mean, he's a man too, so he puts his pants on. He learned a lot of interesting things from interesting people too. So I guess the fun thing is that he put a lot of work in, he put a lot of time in, but then he's also given back to tell other people what he's learned.
Yeah, well, look, you'll understand this. I figured out a way. I'm 80 years old, April.
A youngster, a teenager.
I was at a guy's house for lunch before him, who's 99. He's a really interesting guy and a billionaire. Mutual friend, thought we'd have a good time together, and we did. We had a lot of fun. And he had done a lot of interesting stuff. So he invited me back to a club. I could learn a lot from him. Do you know why Buffett bought Berkshire Hathaway?
I assume because he knew that particular company would make a nice vehicle for other plans that he had. And again, I'm going a little bit from memory here. And that ultimately this notion of acquiring insurance businesses, that this would all work well in that structure.
Yes, because he didn't want to buy textile were failing, but they had NOLs. So he used the NOLs not to pay taxes, which is in no book, but I was talking to one of the guys who put it together, the 99-year-old guy. And he used NOL. If you think about it, you could see.
Define for the audience NOL so everyone's following along.
Losses, previous losses, not used.
Prior losses on the books that you can use currently.
Buffett never says this in public, but the merger gave him all his tax-free earnings. So it wasn't a surprise a couple of years later. He got fully out of the textile business. He was using the NOLs. You wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known. I never read it anywhere. But this guy told me the real story. And I could see it because I'll tell you my quick Buffett story. Do you remember Adam Smith?
Of course. Wealth of Nations.
No, that is a great book. No, Adam Smith was a Jewish guy who used Adam Smith's name because he didn't want to give out his name. He was on public television introducing Buffett. Now I'm sitting there. I was doing very well for me at my age. I'm saying to myself, I'm making a couple $100,000 a year. I'm a kid. I say, why don't I understand the words this guy's saying? I know he's saying something important. I don't understand what he's saying. But I could see he was smart. Maybe this would be a smart thing for me to learn. So I knew I could not get the trades from the partnership. But Berkshire had been in business for 20 years buying stocks. I got the list of every stock he bought and the date. And then I went to Value Line and I bought the page and the date and the print of everything he bought. And I got 3 guys who were like me, said, I'm going to find out what he did. And after a while, I was buying his stocks before they were announced. because I saw what he was doing. I didn't go any further than that because I figured out that if Warren Buffett magically said to me, Larry, I'm going to give you everything that I know, I came to the conclusion that his knowledge was a 10-gallon pail, and I had a 5-gallon pail. So if he gave me all his knowledge, 5 gallons are going to go on the floor. So I took what I thought were his most important things, and I used them. And the way he looked at it in an equation, not like an algorithm. He takes the cash flow after tax on top, takes the price of the stock plus the debt. What was his after-tax yield? How long did it last? And that's exactly what you would do if you were buying a business. And I said, that's the key to his wealth, was compounding. So I bought 11 stock, Berkshire Hathaway. Today, at $11,000 a stock, because I still wasn't sure. Today, that's $300,000 a share. But it took me a long time because I knew he was smarter than me. That was apparent. I put it away. And a lot of people who do trends don't trend the right things. I could see his cash flow growing. So that was one of the things that I looked at even more than the price. And he was winning. I stayed. Then I had, this is really weird, I had too much money in my IRA or whatever it was. I bought more Berkshire, the Bs, and I let him keep going. That grew into millions of dollars. But I was trend following all the time. I was not only trend following the price, I was following the cash flow. I was trend following, but anyway, it was an interesting thing that you could take cash flow, you could break down parts of company, see how each part was performing, where was the money coming from, and where was it going. So this guy, Mike Covel, I'm teaching for Alex Reserman once a year. Kids always ask questions. I took your podcast, walked into the room, turned it on, and said, sit there. You're going to learn something.
My podcast.
Your podcast of the Jeff Bezos is a trend follower.
Do you know how long, if you're a brand new person to my podcast, I think I crunched it, counting up the hours, I think it would take 30 days listening 24/7 to listen to the entire podcast now. That's how many hours there are. A month. You just sit down, put the headphones on and listen for a month, nothing else, 24/7. That's crazy.
No, it's not.
I don't think it's crazy, but I look back on it 8 years later, you're like, a lot of content.
But you have very smart people you interview. And you're a good, and so it's like getting an MBA sometimes, and it's not all finance.
Yeah, I have a lot diverse.
Right. To me, like another degree. In fact, I was on a bike in the gym. I had my cell phone, but I didn't have earphones. So I'm in the gym, and there's a girl behind me. So I'm playing it to hear this thing, and I'm riding on the bike. I say to her, I hope I didn't disturb you. And she said, oh, far be it. That's the most interesting bike ride I ever had.
Hold on, you were listening to my podcast
And she's overhearing me.
And some hot girl is listening to the podcast.
Right.
She's not even interested in you. She's interested in the guy who's on the podcast talking.
Who your guest was, or whatever. I just said, gee, this is really great. This is really, I don't get to hear this stuff. I remember that. Because you do a good job with what you're doing, and it's interesting. If somebody went and listened to 800 of those things, they would have a very good education about the world. Because of the diverse of people, you really do have Nobel Prize winners. You do have very good traders. And I think there's a lot of, and you saw them, life lessons that come from being what it takes to be a trader. Self-mastery, study, and taking action. All the people you have know something, have done something what they know. So it makes a very good, you see a lot of people talk, very few people do. You give the combination of both.
I'm very lucky right now that I get a significant number of really, really, as you talk about, kind of accomplished people, interesting people. And it somewhat feeds on itself now. I mean, I have a lot of publishers and PR firms, et cetera, are always saying, hey, what do you think about this person? What do you think about that person? I mean, they came to me in the last couple of years and said, hey, do you want to have Howard Marks on? Billionaire. Do you want to have Tom Golisano on, who started Paychex? Billionaire. I mean, I'm just kind of hanging out and you get a chance to talk to all these interesting people. It's great.
I think so.
Just like you today, Larry in Aspen.
Yeah, and hopefully Larry doesn't get fried in action. This state is on fire. My friends from Vail came to visit us. Guy is very top money manager, was president of the Philharmonic, New York Philharmonic. Very smart. He got a great wife, just terrific person. So they drive here, 2-hour drive, 7 hours to come home because of smoke. You know, it's bad. You must come to the Ideas Festival.
What's I can get out of Corona, Asia, travel bans right now? They've really made getting around difficult internationally. James Altucher, an author I know who I respect, does nice stuff. He's a lifelong New Yorker. He wrote a really interesting piece the other day, and he basically said he loves New York. He's got businesses in New York, family, everything. But he wrote an interesting piece, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, New York is dead and it's not coming back.
Well, I hope not. But I will tell you, the best thing about the mayor is that he's lazy. That's the best you can say about him.
I mean, he can't mess up things even more, perhaps.
Yes, his wife, who he made something, can't give an accounting of $700 million on projects. When asked about that, her response was, there are always negative people.
You've got a great place in New York City. You love the city. Does my friend, does he have a point? If things got in so bad, so many people leaving, I mean, all the stores are boarded up. There's like 10% of the people that would normally come to those towers are in New York City. Have things shifted in such a way that it's going to take a very, very long time to get back?
I don't know. There's a guy named Cohn who owns a lot of New York real estate. He wants to get the mayor out. He's willing to put $1 million behind that. I am now a Florida resident.
That says something right there, right?
Right.
Will you keep your place in New York?
Yes, but I have to be out of New York City
Tax rules, like half the year or something.
half a year.
I've already kept you longer than I was supposed to. The book that everyone needs to check out, The Rule, How I Beat the Odds in the Markets and in Life, and how you can too. Larry Height. People have to check that out. Larry, now that we're on Zoom, man, this is like we're next door neighbors.
Yes, we are. And that's nice.
Really, seriously.
If this is your 800th,
You are going to be number 900.
900. Well, okay, great. I like talking to you. I talk to you when we're not on. I mean,
I wish we had some of these crazy conversations that we've had when we weren't on.
but we didn't know if they'd allow them on.
I'm the producer. Anything can go on. Hey, listen, you go enjoy your night. We'll catch up soon, sir.
Okay. By the way, you look really great.
You look good too. We're like two male models right now.
Yeah.
Larry, take care. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
My guest today needs no real introduction for this particular podcast, for my trend following podcast, one of my earliest guests. He has appeared many times. He also happens to be, shall I say, the star, one of the main characters of my book, The Complete Turtle Trader. Today I welcome again Jerry Parker, President, CEO, founder of Chesapeake Capital. Jerry's early background, so unique across Wall Street. He is one of the original turtle traders. I always love talking to Jerry. He is a very, very thoughtful, pragmatic guy. I think you will appreciate his wisdom. And do also check out his Twitter feed. Jerry's Twitter feed is one of those feeds that if you're a Wall Street person, he's always finding something interesting. Oh, and one little PSA before I jump into this interview with Jerry. One little PSA. Check out my newest edition of Trend Following. 220,000 words. Get the hardcover version. Trust me. If you have any other version of Trend Following in the past 10 years, you want this edition. You just have to trust me on it. In fact, if you have any other edition, I dare you to buy the newest edition and then send me an email and tell me that it was a waste of your time. I don't think that's going to happen in any way, shape, or form. But in all seriousness, the book has been completely rewritten, expanded. It is the massive newest edition of Trend Following. With my PSA out of the way and without any further delay, nice little rhyme there, let's jump right in with Jerry Parker of Chesapeake Capital. Jerry, my first question is kind of a fun question. I just did a binge watch of the third season of Billions. Do you happen to be a fan of this show at all?
Oh, so much fun. It's like the most popular show in a while. All my friends, we all love it. Even I don't think it has much to do. I'm not sure it has much to do with real life hedge funds, or certainly the hedge funds that I know anything about. And I find myself not always rooting for the hedge fund guy. I find myself rooting for the person who I think is going to win and dominate the other person. So sometimes I'm Paul Giamatti. I'm loving on him and watching him. Looks like he's going to crush this bad hedge fund guy. So much fun. What a great show.
I'm very envious sometimes when I watch a turn of the phrase on there, some of the writing, you just see, my gosh, the creativity is just amazing. Some of the lines, you just say, oh, I wish I wrote that. I wish I said that on Twitter, you know?
One of the great things about being in the hedge fund or trading business or having your own business is not having to shave every day and then not having to dress up. And God, that guy, the guy acts. He never wears a coat and tie. Shows up at fancy events. Maybe if it's black tie, he wears a black tie, but those T-shirts, those fancy T-shirts, what a great lifestyle he perpetuates on the TV.
Let me ask you there. I mean, you've been around occasionally some interesting events, and without naming any names, have you ever seen anybody that cavalier on the dress code?
I don't think so. I mean, I wish I was him. I wish I could pull that off. I like to wear jeans everywhere or be a little casual. And whenever I'm in those situations, I was in one recently. I was a little nervous because I don't want to be the only one there. And then all of a sudden, a friend of mine shows up with a golf shirt and sandals. And I was so relieved, so happy.
I even appreciate it. I take it a step further. I enjoy when he puts on the heavy metal T-shirts. He'll have something like a Black Sabbath or AC/DC on or something. Takes it the extra mile, and I'm like, I'm in love with the attitude. But listen, here's where I want to jump in, away from billions. I want to quote this from you, and you're kind of a fun guy to prepare for because I can basically go to your Twitter and jump inside Jerry's mind to prepare for a conversation with Jerry. That's a fair assessment, right? It's kind of what I can do.
Very fair. I think that every now and then I leave something that I don't, sarcastic. It's a little like trying to make fun of something. And I may not say, hey, I'm trying to make fun of this. So 99% of the time, yes, I think that's true.
So here's the one I want to quote you on, and you'll have to tell me if it's your original line or not. But I thought this was a great way to open up the podcast. And frankly, if we talked about this one line for an hour, I could be happy because there's a lot to break apart here. It's very subtle. It might not be subtle for those that are experienced, but I think for a large portion of the audience, it's probably pretty subtle. The line that I pulled off your Twitter feed, the final step for AI and machine learning will be to wait for the breakout. Is that yours?
It is mine. I don't know. I probably got inspiration from someone else, but that's mine.
I love that one. That's Jerry Buddha right there.
I'm proud of that one. It's a little poor English, probably, but I tried to make it succinct. Maybe it was a little too short, but I do think that what I was trying to say basically is, in my experience, and I think I'm anticipating these algos that are AI or machine learning, I think they will put together some useful information, I would say, and do something that trend following doesn't even attempt to do, of course. But then the final step in that buy, sell, go short, go long, probably could be, let's just wait a couple of days or a few hours or whatever for some sort of price action, buy the high, sell the low, whatever. So let's wait for that breakout. It's a little sarcastic, and I know nothing about AI and machine learning, but I wouldn't be surprised if everything that we find and all the trend followers and CTAs find to be true about the markets, they're going to pick up on that as well. And it's nothing wrong with that. I remember reading a book, Market Wizards, and one of the guys in there is very smart and very wealthy and famous. It was in the first one. And I think he was talking about a Canadian dollar trade, and he was analyzing this trade, the fundamental analysis. And then he sort of said, it could be long, could be short. I guess I'll just wait to see which way it breaks out. And I thought, okay, I just forget that first part and I just wait for it to break out.
You're kind of getting the same place with your comment about AI and machine learning. You're taking the jargon of today, replacing fundamental analysis with AI and machine learning. Maybe not one-to-one, but essentially it's what you're doing. And then coming back and saying, ultimately, but if there's no movement, if there's no price action, then what do we got?
And it works. I remember I had some bad ideas once, counter trend type trading we were researching, and profit objectives, take profits, it goes to everybody's mind, and you research this stuff, and it doesn't have any good statistical basis to trade this way. There's not a lot of sample size if you start concentrating on large trades. So we would just write this rule that said, if it's a large trade and it's gone up X percent, get out, just take a profit. And of course, it looks great on the back test because the computer will go out and find that perfect spot, given the historical data of where you should exit. Sharp ratio goes up. It's just perfect. My research guy came back to me once and said, but you can make it a little bit better. He said, that would be if you just waited to like 1 day lower, 5 days lower. So if you just threw in a little bit of trend on this bad idea, that increases it quite a bit because it works. Sometimes, you will get out at the high, and then sometimes you'll have another 10 or 15% to the upside before it goes to that 1 day lower, and then you can take your profit. Just the power of trend is everyone sees it, everyone picks up on it. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's really crowded and there's lots of trend followers and then not expect people who make it their living to analyze lots of data to say, hey, can I just add this little piece of trend as well? It really seems to be a great timing mechanism.
Not that I approve of this, but it reminds me of athletes of the 90s, particularly baseball, that add steroids to an average player. All of a sudden you have something nice. Add trend following to kind of an average portfolio, you all of a sudden have something nice.
Very good analogy. I love that. Trend following is steroids.
You can send the wire payment directly to me.
I like that. I get a lot of good comments from my friends who text me and email me a lot of good stuff. I always ask them, hey, can I tweet that? I will put your initials on it in quotations. And I did that yesterday. And 90% of the stuff I put out there is not mine. You just happen to find one. And yes, I really like that. So I'm really proud of that one.
Well, I love the one about the AI. And I was just thinking as you were talking about, the notion of adding in trend. And I just had this conversation with Bob Enk, who you know. And so I was just thinking this whole idea, it's like nobody wants to talk about this great thing you're adding in, but everybody knows it's a great thing to add in.
That's right. I did some research projects with a famous research outfit, mostly stocks, but currencies and bonds and commodities as well, down in Florida a few years ago. And when I went down to visit them and talk about our research projects, some of the model builders, they would build models for institutions and traders and clients. He told me the story about how he would be asked to build these models based upon fundamental data. He would say, look, if you just let me add a little bit of trend to it, it'll make it so much better. And a lot of people would say, no trend, can't have that. It's a stigma, it's something going on. I think now that some people call it momentum, and it's promoted by really smart people, momentum is not as bad a word as in trend following, I guess. Kind of the same thing.
I think maybe they just invent new words because people like you and I use the word already, so they need it's a marketing move. Hey, so here's another thing I pulled from your Twitter feed, and you were quoting somebody else who had posted it, but it was just a line from Bridgewater, and it was from, I guess, sometime probably in 2016. And the quote was, Bridgewater Associates expects a 10.4% drop in U.S. equities market should Trump win the presidency. Well, of course, everyone knows that's not happened. We could break that apart for people, and some people are going to know where you're going to go with that. But I think the larger issue that I have there is I'm starting to wonder, and I see this across Twitter, when a firm is so big and so successful, it's almost like they're shielded from constructive debate or constructive criticism. Whereas if it was just some random guy making that statement, we all might have eviscerated it. But if it's Ray Dalio, and I salute his success, one of the best success stories ever, it's an interesting thing where it seems like, how do I want to say this? There's silos a little bit, or maybe my perception's completely wrong. How do you read that? You posted the tweet. You didn't say much about it, but I mean, how do you see that when you see a quote like that from one of the most successful investors of all time?
Well, I mean, I think Bridgewater's pretty amazing, and they've survived. And that right there makes me think they appreciate diversification and taking small losses. I just took that quote as irrelevant that it was from them, but more along the lines of you just need to continue to make fun of predictions and then try to, whenever you can, remember that predictions are kind of dangerous. 0.4%, that was kind of funny. It's kind of like going to a cocktail party and talking about the markets and then someone saying, well, so you must be short the S&P. And I've had this happen. I've had brokers say, so you must be short the S&P. And I was like, oh, God, no, it's in an uptrend. And I'm long. There's two ways of talking. And, there's talking and then there is trading and investing. And so it's okay to separate the two.
But you don't do that personally, that your ethos is such that, I mean, I think that's what I love about your Twitter feed is if I go there, I don't really see any subterfuge. I see this guy saying, here's how I see the markets, here's what I do, but I don't really see any kind of big pronouncements about the stock market going up 23.456%.
No, I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about the stock market in general is that it's a great trend. There's been so many people that have talked bad about it. It continues to go up, and valuations and value and predictions don't work. But it's just a trend. So let's all, if you're a trend follower, like it, get on it, make your money. I think that We have a tendency to talk about diversification and crisis alpha and adding CTAs to your portfolio. And gosh, I wish the stocks wouldn't keep going up. So that, I think, is a mistake. Stocks are wonderful. They're great. They're part of the four sectors, one of the four sectors we trade. And thankfully, we have the stocks because the other three sectors are not doing that great for a while. And I think trend following per se is not managed futures. Trend following is trend following.
Managed futures can mean a lot of things.
Usually what it means is trend following currencies, commodities, stocks, and bonds, long and short. But trend following seems to be working darn well in the stock market. So I'm going to celebrate that. It's a one little beacon of hope out there. The CTAs in general who've diversified their portfolio with currencies, commodities have been punished for that diversification. Doesn't work that well. We have on a lot of short trades now, which is never a good sign. Tell me about your wonderful trades. Well, I'm short silver, gold, and copper. Oh, darn. Yeah, you're right. We're going to make all this money, and we have made money, a lot of money in the past based on long trades mostly. So I don't have a bad thing to say about being long stocks or anything that's in an uptrend and has done really well, regardless of some sort of idea about crisis alpha and hoping stocks go down so people will give me more money. That's kind of silly.
Let me break something apart that you threw out a second ago. You threw a little shade on the concept of value. And of course, if the average listener hears value, they think of Mr. Omaha, who, again, I know by no means are you attempting to insult his investment success. I know none of us would do that. There's no reason for that at all. But it's an interesting observation to make about value. Why don't you try and unpack for the audience how that might work? Because if you were a value investor, and look, I'm not, but I would think that when you've had a 10-year run like we've had, what kind of style of investment could keep you in long at the top other than trend following? It seems like everything else would be saying, well, hold on, this is overvalued.
I'm not sure I'm an expert on value, but I do read a lot about the market is overvalued and it's expensive and things like that, and yet it continues to go up. So I think that's a problem. Once again, I'm in favor of anything that's a process and has rules and a strategy, and maybe applying a little bit of trend to value might help value quite a bit. Not value plus momentum or value plus trend, which a lot of people advocate. I'm talking about add a few breakouts to your value idea, because you can't predict these markets, and the markets are irrational. I mean, it's been overvalued. I'm okay with someone saying, won't you pay attention to science here and let me show you how it's overvalued? I'm like, I'm down with that. It's just been overvalued for 5 years or whatever. Let's just make money and not try to make it an opinion contest or an intellectual contest. It's a trading competition, and adding the trend and the breakout. I'll buy these value stocks when they're at the 10-day high, the 50-day high. I don't know. And they keep going lower. You save yourself a lot of money.
See, I think you're a wise, intellectual, smart guy, but in the way that you accept price versus where I think most people, if they're imagining what a fund manager might do in the markets, they're thinking it's kind of like Axelrod. It's like Jerry Parker's at the screen using his brilliance on a moment-by-moment basis to know every lever to pull or push or prove, or to make happen. They think that's what it is, whereas it's something different. The intellectual part in your world is coming from a different angle, in my perspective.
Well, through trial and error, mostly error, you have to acknowledge that embracing the process and the rules is where you want to be. At the heart of a lot of fascinating people and successful people, football, athletics, coaching, acting, science, whatever. It's people who have a good process and have, thankfully for me, I've strayed off the rules many times over the years, but never been rewarded for it. Not a momentary success where I could say, oh, wow, got lucky on that one. I've always been punished and pushed towards going back to following those rules. And early on when I was trading for Richard Dennis and stuff, I saw lots of opportunities, lots of people who had the same experience, that not following the rules was always a bad idea. Even if it's a so-so rules, just follow them. And I think that's the most important thing along with being conservative and trading small. Yeah, those are the two things that I was told in 1983. The most important things: follow the rules and trade small. And every time I've gotten in trouble and really regretted it, it was violating one of those two rules or both at the same time. But yeah, that's kind of a sad situation. It's not a great story.
You don't make it sound sexy.
I'm always wondering if there's anybody out there who can do it better and do it different. Once again, I think there are people who do it different and better, but more than likely they have a good process. Just like Buffett, he has obviously a good process, good systems, good rules, sticks to them. That's kind of the key.
Hey, I know you're a huge fan of sports, and I know you like to look at the analytics of the whole thing as well. What's been most interesting to you in your reading and whatnot? What you pick the sport, you pick the player, you pick what you're interested in. One of the things I think is really interesting is in baseball, the guys that, with the way that pitchers are throwing, the shifts they're doing, and that a lot of batters are figuring out to be really aggressive on the first pitch strike. And just, crunching the numbers and seeing how this all plays out. It's fascinating what's going on in baseball. What is intriguing you these days in the field of sports analytics?
When I first went to Chicago in 1983, I, at the same time, introduced to trend following and turtles. My friends there, some of them were showing me these books by Bill James, and I was introduced to baseball analytics at the same time. It was very fascinating and fun. And of course, now Bill James works for the Red Sox and John Henry, and baseball analytics is an incredible field. I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is happening in Tampa, my hometown, one of my hometowns. Tampa's sort of playing around with no starting pitcher. That sort of a reliever starts the game. And I think baseball over the years has gone from pitching, quote unquote, to defense. Now, pitching is part of defense, and pitching is not the defense. So the shifts, using pitchers in situations and starting the relievers and bringing in your best pitcher in the seventh inning with the bases loaded to stop that from getting out of control versus waiting for the ninth inning. And it's really, you can see it from the NFL point of view. I remember when Joe Gibbs inserted the nickelback the first time the fifth defensive back came on the field. People were horrified by this. Now there's this sort of shifting going on in baseball that really rubs traditionalists the wrong way, but it's really kind of fascinating to watch baseball change as much as it possibly can. And I keep up with baseball through, I recommend this Joe Sheehan newsletter, and I recommend that you have him on your show. He's a phenomenal writer and expert on baseball analytics.
I will absolutely take you up on that bit of advice. In fact, you mentioned John Henry, who I think in a past life was one of your peers in the trading world. And I know that when John pivoted and went from the trading world to the sports world, probably some of the press kind of, maybe not say such nice things. I think in the long run, his pivot and his trend following applications in sports has been a pretty good move, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, John Henry's kind of a genius, and what amazing life and performance he's had and continues to have. I don't know if it's trend following in baseball. It's certainly math and numbers and Excel and analytics. But so much fun. I love that that's part of baseball. It makes me like baseball. And baseball is unique in the sense that it lends itself to this pitcher-batter event that takes place, and you can total up those numbers and kind of get a better idea of exactly what's going on. But yeah, he was fantastic in the trading. I'm sure he still trades and still watches the markets. What an amazing situation to be in, to be able to take that love of numbers and gamesmanship and winning to a major league and then the soccer level as well. Really admire that guy. He's phenomenal.
What's so awesome about it, too, is if you say, well, gosh, would baseball really be baseball without the Yankees and without the Red Sox? And one of those teams is owned and controlled by either a former or a still trend-following trader. I think that's a really fun aspect.
Over the years, when John Henry was managing money, lots of money, usually more money than everyone else. He gave a handful of speeches over the years that were just incredible. And sometimes when the industry was having big drawdowns, and the way he was able to encourage people and set people right in their thinking, kind of like now where the trend followers and CTAs don't we get some criticism for lack of performance. That's really, what it takes is someone to, regardless of performance, just to sort of say the truth, which is we play a positive expectation game. Don't give up. We're losing money. People dislike us right now, but let's just do the next trade and keep going. Digging up some of his old speeches, they're probably out there, and some of the things he said were such an encouragement to me over the years. Very big fan.
Let me pivot from John, and I think what I'm going to pivot to would actually represent his past trading, which was phenomenal. But this is a line that I also pulled from your Twitter feed, which I think is great. And I want you to kind of just, when you hear it, I want you to tell the college audience that's listening, what does Jerry Parker mean when he says this? The best returns in life and markets are lumpy. What does that mean? I want straight line, Mr. Parker. I don't want all of that risk. What does lumpy mean?
It's worse than lumpy. Lumpy just means that you're not going to make 1 or 2% a month. It's a lot of losses and bad periods, and then you make a bunch kind of quickly. Exactly the opposite of what people would like. It's not going to be a good Sharpe ratio. But I think I read an article recently from Morningstar, was incredibly one of the best things I've read in a while. They did some analysis of real traders, and they did some hypothetical analysis to see if the hypothetical matched the real traders, and it did. And it basically said that after 20 or 30 years of managing money, the people who finished in the top 10% or so had the worst performance over long stretches of time. So maybe a 5 to 10 year period where they were near the bottom. And then that was what was required in order to be in the top 10% after 20 or 30 years. It wasn't like it was an option, because the opposite was true. Those people who did not have a 5 or 10 year really bad period, none of those guys were in the top 10%. It's mandatory to go out there and find. Can you imagine going to your research guy and say, no, here's a system that's not lumpy. The Sharpe is too high. It doesn't have extended periods of bad performance. You've got to go back to the drawing board. You've got to find a system that has bad performance that almost no one would be able to stick with. This is a requirement. It's a characteristic. It's a part of something that's good. I mean, it just gets worse and worse of what is required.
If I just had an energy meter there, that last 20 seconds of you, I could just see your face lighting up saying, I know this to be true, and I want the audience to understand what I know.
And encourage people, that get ready. This is what's going to happen. Embrace it, like it. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than, here's a system, we've done research. Not only should you not feel bad through extended periods of bad performance, it's a marker that you're onto something. You're onto something good. And then embrace, how hard it is and how perverse it is, and how you want criticism, and you want people to say it's dead, trend following is dead, or whatever you're doing is not working. You've got to have that, at least in the systematic approach that in the currencies, commodities, stocks, and bonds. I know there's Bobby Axelrod's out there who, I guess he was starting to get in. One of his guys was starting to get involved with algos and stuff. But I think for the vast majority of us, embrace the pain. It's a good sign.
Let me get a big philosophical one out at you to open up. I know this is kind of in your wheelhouse. I know you've kind of talked about it some. So your governmental designation is often a CTA, commodity trading advisor, kind of a misnomer, doesn't exactly describe what you do, but hey, that's the regulatory term. Why don't you talk about the notion, though, of the traditional portfolio, the typical 60-40 stock split? Why don't you open up the thought process to CTAs perhaps bringing in-house more than their component they typically contribute, the 10% alternative component. But why don't you break this open and put on the table the idea of CTAs doing more with the traditional 60-40 split, actually the application of your techniques to those assets as well?
I really dislike the whole idea of crisis alpha. It makes no sense whatsoever. Yeah, I think it was invented by some people who don't really like CTAs. Crisis alpha, it's a bad idea. It's silly. It doesn't make any sense. In order to provide crisis alpha, we'd have to trade suboptimal systems. Would it be really short term? We'd need to get short that S&P really quickly. Shorter term trend, at least that I know about, it doesn't work very well. I think the people who are able to add crisis alpha and make money all the time, basically, or take advantage of really short term moves, especially shorting stocks or the S&P when it breaks violently, like February. Great, great for you. I mean, you're a hero. You're amazing. You're way better than me and most of the rest of us, mere mortals. Go for it. But I wouldn't say to add you as crisis alpha. Why, if you're that good and you're going to produce these profits and on a really short-term trading idea, why bother with 60-40? Just give this guy and people like him all of your money. I mean, why would you do 60-40 if you really believed in a guy who really had a high Sharp and made money very quickly and could help your 60-40? Why not give him the vast majority or create a kind of a portfolio of these short-term guys? Why mess around with crisis alpha? It doesn't make any sense. And most of the normal long-term trend following, medium-term trend following CTAs, they themselves kind of expect 5 or 10% of a portfolio at the max. Or how much crisis alpha is that going to give you? If you really want to do something about crisis alpha, let me trade your equities with trend following. Let me trade your bonds with trend following. Let me trade your 60-40 with trend following. A long, short, using a stop loss, taking small losses and having a trailing stop. And then I'll throw in a few currencies and commodities as well, as many as you'll let me, because that'll help us with diversification and making more money, because those markets are uncorrelated. But your problem, you've got a 60-40 passive long only, let's say, or whatever, with your equities. Therein is your problem. You've got a dysfunctional idea, a dysfunctional portfolio with no risk control, no process, no plan except to buy and hold. And then you say to me, hey, here's 5%, crisis alpha me. What? No, I don't think I can do that. It's like going to the doctor and saying, okay, you're giving me this bad report, fix me, but I'm not going to change my bad diet. No, I mean, I'll try. I'll nibble around the edges. But trust me, let me get in there and do what's right for all of your portfolio. That's how I can add value. That's how we can add crisis alpha, by putting a trailing stop on Apple, Amazon, etc.
Can I sum this up that you just took on the role of Manny Pacquiao in his prime? You went into the ring and you threw about 30 different punches that a lot of people in your particular position might not throw. So you seem to be very comfortable with the intellectual joust here of saying, hey, let's put it all on the table. If we're trying to win and we're trying to be intellectually honest, then let's be that.
Then at some point in time, the next 50% drawdown of the S&P, which will recover after a few years and go back to new highs again, a repeat of 08 and through 18, I have no problem if that's what happens, or assuming that might happen again. People are going to say, do you want people coming up and saying, why didn't you advocate what you knew to be the truth, which is you should use a systematic approach on all of these assets? Why are you just sitting there groveling for 5 or 10% when you know better? I mean, how many long-term, wealthy, multi-billion-dollar CTA funds with PhD research staffs who can do whatever they want to do to add value to the clients, with carte blanche to create systems and portfolios in any way? I do too, and I'm not large. But how many of these guys are out there saying, we have done our analysis and we agree that we need X% passive long-only S&P or stocks in our portfolio? That's going to make things a lot better. Zero have said that.
Well, what's the fear, Jerry? What's the fear?
No, there's no fear. Their analysis of the markets does not dictate that. They have no reason not to do it. There's no fear. They could just hide it in there and say, we've looked at all these markets and all the arguments, and we too agree that we should have a large passive part in our portfolio. that's going to make our overall performance better. I don't see anybody advocating that, even though they can do it and they have the resources to prove whether it's true or not. No one really believes that to be true, I think, amongst the CTAs or the hedge funds that use a systematic approach. It's not true. It's impossible to trade a systematic approach with a medium to long-term system and add in a few currencies, commodities to the stocks and bonds and have a performance as bad as 8% on average and a 50+% drawdown. It just is impossible. We can't do it.
As we kind of keep tearing this apart, let me throw at you a question that I saw you post. You said question of the day. You had two questions. They were kind of a little, I guess they're the same one essentially, but the second one really caught my eye, and I would love for you to kind of give your perspective on it, and maybe we'll tear back into what we were just talking about there also. What single sentence describes what most investors really want? Because we can talk about all the managers and whatnot, but what do investors want, and do they know what they want?
Yeah, that question was a little confusing. Didn't formulate that perfectly. I think that what people want that's a whole nother can of worms. But I guess what I was trying to get at was how would you describe what you're trying to deliver to your clients? What is your edge and what are you trying to do? What should people kind of want? And I think for me, it was more of a risk-controlled experience like trend following will give you without in less risk than this S&P we keep beating up on, but without any lost opportunity for profit. So I'd like a little more risk control, smaller losses and smaller drawdowns, but I don't really want to give up a great deal of upside potential. For many years, I think that's what the CTAs offered. They demonstrated that in the currencies and commodities and bonds. They ended up performing very well compared to the stocks. And that just hasn't been the case recently, where it does look like the stocks are superior markets, superior trending markets. I don't think they are. I don't think they will be in the long run, but it certainly looks like they are. I think that's the ultimate question that everybody should ask. What am I giving up if I diversify, if I go into the typical CTA portfolio with long and short currencies, long and short commodities, plus the stocks and bonds? It does look like I'm really giving up some upside potential. I appreciate maybe the extra risk control I'm getting with more diversification with shorts, small losses, but it does seem like it's awfully easy just to own a passive index and pay almost zero for that and make more money. That's really the issue, I think, is that going to continue to be the case, or are we going to revert back to the 90s and early 2000s where CTAs made more money and had less risk?
Let me go even bigger picture with you for a second. I've just got this thought that's coming to me. I think about the subject of trend following, and I say to myself, okay, give me the other strategies that are as well-researched with so many available track records that one can look at for evidence going back decades. I mean, for those people that might not know about the proof that I'm talking about, it exists. Do a few searches, you can figure it out. So if we take trend following and we compare it to the something else, and let's put aside for a second Warren Buffett, let's put aside for a second Ray Dalio, two great investors with their own thing and so big that they're just almost something else. And let's put aside the Bobby Axelrods of the world, and let's put aside high frequency trading. I mean, we don't get to be in the trading room at JP Morgan, so I don't really know where that does anything for the average investor. If we have to compare trend following, excluding those four, what are the other trading strategies that match up with trend following? That's
a good question. But I think to some degree, I don't think we can rule out the possibility that trend following won't work very well. Maybe it can be torpedoed. I think the CTAs themselves will be the culprits of too much volatility targeting, indiscriminate selling, crazy large orders going in and making the markets cotton crash or cocoa crash. And so I think that the CTAs themselves, the trend followers themselves, could easily create a bad trend following experience. And maybe that's partially what's happening. But once again, in the most important, the most liquid, the most watched markets out there, the stocks, trend following is doing well. Why? Because there's been trends. We shouldn't discount the possibility that in the same way, and we have this worldview, which we love what we do and we think it's great, but in the same way, the value people are saying the same thing. Are you going to buy these high-priced stocks? You've seen that they crash. We got to stick with this. It doesn't make any sense. We'll go down fighting. We'll go down to the death with our worldview. I look at it a little bit differently than other alternatives. I look at it itself, and I say, let's break down the components. Taking small losses. Are we going to start taking big losses? Is that the key? I don't think so. Are we going to start taking small profits and not participating in the big, huge outliers? That doesn't seem right. Are we going to pay attention to things other than price only? Well, then you're kind of in discretionary land and no sample size and no back test worth looking at and being very confused because even if trend following doesn't work, we see that other things that don't pay attention to price, they don't work either. Is the key limiting our diversification? No shorts, no currencies, no commodities, stocks only. Maybe we can make 6 or 7% and have that 50% drawdown ourselves. That doesn't seem right. So I think when you break down the components of what we do, it is a lot of risk control and a lot of things that I'm just not willing to not do. If we don't make money and we shop around and we make just a very small amount, and so be it. But I'm not going to increase my risk and change my worldview of how important it is to take small losses and pay attention to price and be fully diversified and play for the outlier trade. All the components and the characteristics of what we do are non-negotiables for me. Maybe in the same way that looking at value is something that the value people are not ever going to give up on. It just makes too much sense. And then maybe we'll all just be bypassed by people who say you guys are stuck into history and you refuse to be flexible. But I've never made a claim. I've never had a home of mine catch on fire or have a major problem, a flood. But it's not even a question whether I'm going to have insurance. And it's not a question for me whether I'm going to proceed in these markets in the safest, most conservative way possible, which is trend following.
You just mentioned your worldview, and I would love for you to describe what your worldview is, but I can only imagine that a lot of your worldview has to do with, my gosh, the future is uncertain, and my gosh, I can't predict it. And that seems like a very grounded worldview. You might want to expand on those and maybe add if there's more to your worldview.
That's it. It's dangerous out there, and you can't predict. And I don't believe that stocks are superior and the go-to investment all the time. You got to pay attention to the trend and protect yourself and be humble and conservative and worried about risk. So all of the things that I talked about over the past 5 minutes, that's my worldview. And I don't see that really changing regardless of performance. And I don't know that is a smart thing, but it's just how I'm going to proceed.
Hey, let me ask you one last question, kind of really a non-trading question. I've met you for the first time a long time ago, and I'm fairly introverted myself. I would probably classify you as fairly introverted. But, I know you made many speeches over the 90s and into the 2000s, but not huge amounts. But I know in the last 5 to 6 years on this podcast, other opportunities to speak to people, you have put yourself out there on the line and offered wisdom, education, a lot more. What has been your experience? How has that changed your perception of communication? Because you really have changed a significant amount, at least when it comes to Jerry communicating with people. That seems like a big change for you versus earlier in your career.
I mean, the opportunities are greater, to be on a podcast or give a speech. I have a lot of opinions, and I think, especially as it relates to trading and very specific preferences, I think trend following is so powerful that if you go with the trend and take small losses and diversify fully, then it doesn't seem to matter. All of these things we all pick up on that we just want to die on, this idea of how we're going to do our business and what we think is correct. I read a lot more than I talk, and I read a lot about traders and successful people who have very opinions just as strong as mine. And then we're all 60, 70, 80% correlated. So to some degree, I think all of these opinions that I'm very excited about making sure everyone knows how smart I am and how much I am the true trend follower and pure trend follower.
Come on now, hold on. Now there's some Jerry Parker sarcasm because you don't do that. You are very humble about this.
It just doesn't seem to matter as long as you do the basics and the big stuff correct. There's nothing as important as trading, all the markets or all the good liquid markets. When you get a hold of these trends and you're just simply on the trend and you're making money, there is no system, there's no entry exit, there's no filter that is going to help you if you didn't catch that trend. Simply, I just did it, didn't feel like it, didn't like it, but I did the trade, and then there you go. And then when you don't do it, you sit back with all your computers and your intelligence and say, oh, darn, I guess the markets are kind of more important than almost anything else.
So cool that you got a chance to be exposed to that so early in life, huh?
Oh, I mean, it's, what an experience. I mean, it was the smartest people, some of the smartest people on the planet, nicest, kindest, taught us everything we needed to know, put us in a room by ourselves, sink or swim, but with a totally pretend environment in a sense that here's your money to manage, and it's kind of all you have to do is do the trades the way that we've taught you to do them. If performance is not good, so be it. Who cares? These are our systems. We love them. They're great. You do what we tell you to do, at least philosophically. And if you do well by not following the systems, you're going to be in big trouble. And then if you lose money, we may give you some more money in your account. And so then when you get out 4 years later to the real world, this is not how clients act. It's so being in that environment, at least in the early years, and having that kind of encouragement, it's kind of like, here's nothing against teaching people to trade, but it is a unique experience to be there with someone like Richard Dennis and Bill Eckhart. It's just can't be replicated. You can't read a book and be a Marine. You can't read a book or read some lessons. It's not going to be as good as being there with the creator, the author.
You can say that confidently because there was only a small number of you there.
Exactly.
There wasn't thousands. Maybe we'll save this for the next conversation. It is an interesting point because, I started with tearing apart your world, and then it was like all of a sudden like, well, hold on. Who is this guy over here who ended up buying a baseball team? Who is this guy over here that ended up making an Ayn Rand movie? All these other traders that were unaffiliated with you guys that were doing something similar. So it's just, trend following is an amazing story. It's there are so many different ways you can go down the path. And look, there's big guys out there right now from the University of Chicago that are trading these concepts. So it's really an amazing, tough strategy to kill.
Yes, the importance of understanding that good luck and bad luck over long periods of time can make it look like you're wonderful or you're horrible and things have stopped working. But to some degree, it's why it works is because it doesn't work as often as we'd all like it to. And we all have an inaccurate concept of what long-term is when it's time to sort of give up. There was a fascinating article yesterday read from Mark Hulbert from 30 years has evaluated stock market newsletters and grab that. It's really interesting. I tweeted 10 or 15 paragraphs from that yesterday. It was quite amazing that he learned those same lessons, that the most important thing was a process and sticking to it. And I think that whenever I tweet things, I get maybe 5 responses or 5 likes. And I'm like, this is just amazing. This is an incredible insight. 5 people will like it. But every now and then, I will tweet something that basically has that same message. You can do it. Stick to it. You're a normal person, but follow the trend and diversify. And I'll get 50 to 100 likes. That's what people are craving.
I'm sure you've seen this, but one of the reasons I think that happens, and I see it in my world too, is we might have a follower who's got a big following and a big engaged following. And then when they do a retweet, then boom, that takes off. Social media. Oh my God, it's going to kill us all.
Yeah, I don't understand it.
Seriously. Hey, Jerry, the best place for people to check you out, Chesapeake Capital. Is there anywhere else? Is there anything you would like to tell people about in terms of what's going on in the business side of your world right now?
Our funds are growing, and I think trend following is still viable. Check out ChesapeakeCapital.com and RJ Parker Jr. 09 on Twitter. Stay out of trouble with the regulators. That's probably all I should say.
Jerry Parker, so understated. Trend following is still viable. I don't know where you can put that tattoo across your chest or something. Trend following is still viable. Jerry, I appreciate you taking the time today.
Michael, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.